A desperate scream, a collapsing cabin, one cowboy's bare hands against death itself. When Luke Marston heard that cry echo across the Montana Valley, he didn't know he was racing toward the moment that would define the rest of his life. What he found buried in that wreckage wasn't just a woman and child fighting for survival, it was his future, his purpose, and a love he never knew he needed. This is a story of courage, heartbreak, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the darkest moments. Stay with me until the very end of this journey and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The Montana sky stretched endless and blue that morning, the kind of crystalline clarity that made a man believe the world was fundamentally good. Luke Marston didn't put much stock in such notions anymore. He'd lived 32 years learning that beauty and brutality existed side by side, that nature gave and took with equal indifference, and that a man's character was measured not by his words, but by what he did when everything went to hell. He was checking fence lines on the northern ridge of the Broken Star Ranch, his gelding picking its way carefully through the scrub pine and loose shale. The work was solitary, methodical, the kind that let a man's mind wander without consequence. Luke preferred it that way. He'd spent the better part of a decade avoiding complications, especially the kind that involved other people's problems. The horse's ears pricked forward first, swiveling toward the valley below. Luke felt it through the reins before he heard it, a disturbance in the morning's peace. Then came the sound that would replay in his nightmares for months to come, a woman's scream, raw and terrified, followed by the groaning crack of timber giving way. Luke's head snapped toward the source. Down in the shallow basin, maybe half a mile distant, a small cabin was collapsing in on itself like a house of cards caught in a slow-motion wind. Except this wasn't slow. The structure's northern wall buckled, then the roof sagged inward with a sound like bones breaking. A cloud of dust and debris mushroomed upward, catching the morning light. He didn't think. Thinking was for men who had the luxury of time. Luke kicked his horse into a gallop, leaning low over the animal's neck as they plunged down the steep slope. The gelding was sure-footed, but even so, loose stones scattered beneath its hooves, the descent reckless and necessary. Every second mattered. Luke knew what happened to people caught in structural collapses. He'd seen it once during a barn fire. The weight, the suffocation, the terrible arithmetic of time versus survival. The ride down felt both instantaneous and eternal. His heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline sharpening every sense. He could smell the dust now, acrid and thick. As he drew closer, he heard something that made his blood run cold, the thin, desperate wail of an infant. Luke pulled up hard 20 yards from the wreckage, dismounting before the horse had fully stopped. The cabin, if it could still be called that, was a chaotic heap of splintered logs, collapsed roofing, and shattered glass. The entire structure had pancaked, the walls splaying outward like the petals of some grotesque flower. Steam rose from what must have been the cook stove, adding an eerie quality to the destruction. "Hello?" Luke's voice came out hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder. "Can you hear me? Where are you?" For a moment, only silence. Then, "Help us! Please, God, help us!" The voice came from the center of the collapse, weak but alive. Female. Desperate. Luke moved fast, climbing onto the unstable pile of debris. Every step was a calculated risk. The wreckage shifted beneath his weight, groaning ominously. A sharp edge tore through his shirt and opened a gash along his ribs. He barely noticed. "Keep talking," he called out. "I need to find you. Keep making noise. Here, we're here." The woman's voice broke into sobs. "Please hurry, my baby." The infant's cry guided him like a beacon. Luke pulled aside a section of roofing, the tar paper still warm in his hands. Beneath it he glimpsed fabric, a dress, pale blue, pinned beneath a massive roof beam. "I see you," Luke said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I'm going to get you out. What's your name?" "Hannah. Hannah Miller." The words came between gasping breaths. "My daughter, Emma, she's on my chest. I can't move my legs." Luke assessed the situation with the cold practicality of a man who doctored injured horses and pulled calves from difficult births. The beam across Hannah's lower body was old-growth pine, at least 200 pounds. It had her pinned from the waist down. She was lying on her back, both arms wrapped protectively around a bundle pressed against her chest. The baby's cries were strong, a good sign, but Hannah's face was gray, her lips nearly colorless. Shock, blood loss, or both. "Hannah, I'm Luke. I'm going to lift this beam off you, but I need you to do something for me first." He positioned himself at the end of the timber, getting his hands underneath it. "When I lift, you're going to hand me that baby. Can you do that?" I think so." "Don't think. Just do it. On 3. 1. He didn't wait for 3. Luke drove upward with everything he had, his back and legs screaming in protest as the beam rose 6 inches, then 12. His vision darkened at the edges, his breath coming in short bursts, but he held it. "Now!" he roared. Hannah's arms moved with a mother's desperate strength. She thrust the bundle toward him just as Luke's grip began to slip. He saw the baby, tiny, maybe 6 months old, covered in dust but wailing with impressive lung capacity, and he had to make a choice. He couldn't hold the beam and take the child. If he dropped the beam now, it would crush Hannah's chest. Luke's muscles trembled. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. The world narrowed to this single moment, this impossible physics problem written in flesh and blood and consequence. "Slide her toward me," Luke gasped. "On the ground. Slide her." Hannah understood immediately. With a motion that must have cost her everything, she set the baby down and pushed the small body across the debris-strewn surface, away from the beam's shadow. The baby rolled once, twice, coming to rest against a fallen door frame. Luke let the beam drop. It crashed down with a sound like thunder, missing Hannah by inches. He scrambled toward the infant, scooping her up with shaking hands. The little girl's face was red with outrage, her tiny fists windmilling, but she was whole, unbroken. He set her carefully on a relatively clear patch of ground several yards from the wreckage, then turned back to Hannah. She was trying to sit up, her face a mask of agony. "Don't move," Luke commanded, climbing back onto the debris pile. "Let me do the work." "Emma, is she—" "She's mad as hell and twice as loud. That's a good baby." Luke positioned himself again at the beam. "This is going to hurt you. I won't lie about that. But I'm getting you out." Hannah nodded, her jaw set. Luke noticed her hands then, small, work-worn, the nails broken. These were hands that knew labor, that knew hardship. Her dark blonde hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in tangled waves around a face that might have been beautiful under better circumstances. Right now, it was all angles and shadows, pain carved into every line. Luke gripped the beam. This time he knew what to expect, how his body would respond, where to find the leverage. He lifted again, slower this time, controlled. The beam rose. Beneath it, he saw Hannah's legs twisted at unnatural angles. His stomach turned, but he kept his face neutral. "Can you pull yourself backward?" he asked through gritted teeth. Hannah tried. Got maybe 3 inches before crying out. Luke's arms began to shake again. "Stop," he said. "New plan." He couldn't hold the beam much longer. Already his grip was slipping, his forearms burning. He looked around frantically for something, anything to prop the timber up. There, part of a door frame, sturdy enough if he could. "Listen to me carefully," Luke said. "I'm going to shift my weight to one side. When I do, this beam is going to roll. If I do it right, it'll roll away from you. If I do it wrong—" He left that possibility unspoken. "But I can't hold it much longer, so we're out of options." "Do it." Hannah's voice was surprisingly steady. "I trust you." Something in those words, simple, absolute, struck Luke harder than the physical strain. When was the last time someone had said they trusted him? When had he given anyone reason to? No time to philosophize. Luke shifted his grip, feeling the beam's center of gravity. He waited for his breathing to steady, for that moment between heartbeats when the body became purely mechanical. Then he threw his weight to the right, simultaneously pushing and guiding the timber. It worked. The beam rolled slowly at first, then gaining momentum. It crashed down 5 feet away, the impact sending up another cloud of dust. Luke collapsed forward onto his hands and knees, gasping, his muscles turned to water. But he didn't rest long. Maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10. Then he was moving again, crawling to Hannah's side. Up close, the damage was worse than he'd feared. Both legs were clearly broken, one bent at the knee in a way that made him wince. There was blood, too, seeping through her dress, though he couldn't tell the source. "I'm going to pick you up," Luke said. "It's going to hurt like hell." "Everything already hurts like hell," Hannah managed, a ghost of humor in her voice despite everything. Luke slid his arms beneath her, one under her shoulders, one under her knees. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile. He lifted her as smoothly as he could, but even so, her sharp intake of breath told him the price she paid. She bit down on her lower lip hard enough to draw blood, refusing to scream. Tough. This woman was tougher than rawhide. He carried her away from the wreckage to where he'd left the baby. Emma had cried herself into hiccuping silence, her blue eyes wide and bewildered. Luke set Hannah down as gently as possible on a patch of grass, then retrieved the infant and placed her in her mother's arms. Hannah's entire demeanor changed the moment she held her daughter. The pain didn't vanish from her face, but it was joined by something fiercer: relief, love, determination. She examined Emma with frantic thoroughness, checking every tiny finger and toe, running her hands over the baby's head and limbs. "She's perfect," Hannah whispered, tears streaming down her dust-caked face. "You saved her. You saved us both." Luke was already moving, unbuckling his saddlebag. He pulled out a canteen and a clean bandana. He'd planned to use the bandana to wipe down his horse later. Now he poured water over it and handed it to Hannah. "Clean her face first," he said. "Make sure there's no debris in her mouth or nose." While Hannah tended to Emma, Luke made a more thorough assessment of her injuries. Both tibias were fractured, that much was certain. Compound fracture on the right leg. He could see bone through the torn fabric of her dress. Several ribs were likely broken too, given the way she held herself. Possible internal bleeding. She needed a doctor, quickly. "Where's your husband?" Luke asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. No man worth the name would have left his family in a death trap like that cabin. Hannah's jaw tightened. "Silver Creek. He left 4 days ago. Said he had business." Silver Creek was the nearest town, such as it was, a collection of rough buildings serving the miners, ranchers, and drifters who passed through this corner of Montana territory. It had 3 saloons and 1 part-time doctor. Luke could guess what kind of business kept a man there for 4 days while his wife and infant daughter lived in a structure that should have been condemned. "The cabin," Hannah's voice cracked. "I woke up and heard this groaning sound. The whole place was shaking. I just grabbed Emma and tried to get to the door, but everything came down so fast." Luke examined the wreckage with a more critical eye now that the immediate crisis had passed. The collapse hadn't been random. The foundation posts had rotted through completely on one side, probably weakened over years of moisture and neglect. A structure like that should have been abandoned or rebuilt long ago. Anyone with eyes could have seen it was dangerous. "How long have you been living here?" he asked. 6 months. Since Emma was born. Hannah looked at the ruins of her home, her expression unreadable. "Jacob found it abandoned, said we could fix it up, make it ours. He was going to repair the foundation, replace the bad timber." She trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging between them like an accusation. Jacob. So that was the husband's name. Luke filed it away along with his growing impression of a man who made promises he had no intention of keeping. "What you need right now is medical attention," Luke said, standing. "I'm going to make a travois to transport you. There's a ranch about 3 miles south, the Broken Star. That's where I work. The foreman's wife used to nurse in the war. She can stabilize you until we get you to Silver Creek." "I can't pay," Hannah started. "I didn't ask if you could pay." Luke's tone was sharper than he intended. He softened it. "Right now, all you need to worry about is holding that baby and staying conscious. Let me handle the rest." He worked quickly, using his knife to cut saplings and his rope to lash together a simple but functional travois. The whole time he was aware of Hannah watching him with an intensity that made him self-conscious. What did she see? A stranger who happened to be in the right place? Or something else? Luke didn't allow himself to wonder. Wondering led to hoping, and hoping led to disappointment. He'd learned that lesson thoroughly. When the travois was ready, he attached it to his horse and fashioned a nest of his bedroll and saddle blanket on the platform. Lifting Hannah onto it required disturbing her broken legs again. This time she did cry out, a sharp sound that cut through him like a blade. The baby, sensing her mother's distress, began to wail again. "I'm sorry," Luke said uselessly. Hannah just shook her head, clutching Emma tighter. Her face had gone from gray to greenish white. Shock was setting in harder now. Luke worked faster, securing her to the travois with his remaining rope so she wouldn't fall off during the journey. He tucked his jacket around her despite the warm morning, knowing that shock victims needed to stay warm. "We're going to move now," he told her. "It'll be bumpy, but I'll go as slow as I can." The 3-mile journey back to the Broken Star was the longest of Luke's life. He walked beside his horse, keeping one hand on the travois to steady it over the rough terrain. Every jolt made Hannah gasp or whimper, sounds she tried to suppress but couldn't quite manage. Emma cried for the first mile, then fell into an exhausted sleep, her small head resting against her mother's chest. Luke found himself talking to fill the silence, to give Hannah something to focus on besides the pain. He told her about the ranch, about the foreman Tom Garrett and his wife Sarah, about the 23 horses they were currently training, about the particular stubbornness of a mare named Delilah, who refused to accept a saddle. "You work with horses," Hannah said at one point, her voice dreamy with pain or blood loss or both. "Yes, ma'am." "Jacob hates horses, says they're too expensive to keep, too stupid to trust." She laughed, a brittle sound. "He sold mine, the one my father gave me, sold her to pay a gambling debt. I cried for 3 days. Luke said nothing. What could he say? That her husband was a fool? She clearly knew that already. That she deserved better? That was her business, not his. But something hot and angry kindled in his chest anyway, and it surprised him. Luke Marston didn't get involved, didn't let himself feel too much about other people's troubles. Yet here he was, furious on behalf of a woman he'd met less than an hour ago. When the ranch buildings finally came into view, Luke had never been more grateful to see home. The Broken Star wasn't much, a main house, a bunkhouse, a barn, and a series of corrals, but it was solid, well-maintained, and staffed by people who knew their business. Sarah Garrett was hanging laundry when she spotted them approaching. She took one look at the travois and its passenger, dropped the wet sheet she'd been holding, and started shouting for Tom. Within minutes, they had Hannah transferred to a real bed in the spare room of the main house. Sarah cleared everyone out except Luke. "I need a strong back and steady hands," she said, and set to work with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen worse. Luke found himself in the unfamiliar role of assistant, following Sarah's crisp instructions. Hold this. Press here. Don't let her move. The work was bloody and brutal. Sarah had to cut away Hannah's dress to access the wounds properly. The compound fracture needed cleaning and setting. Luke held Hannah's shoulders while Sarah worked, feeling her body go rigid with agony, hearing her stifled screams. Emma, mercifully, slept through most of it in a makeshift crib Tom had hastily constructed from a wooden crate and soft blankets. "The legs will heal," Sarah finally announced, washing her hands in a basin of pink-tinged water. "The ribs, too, given time and rest. But she's lost blood, and I'm concerned about infection. She needs to see Doc Brennan in Silver Creek." "I'll take her," Luke said immediately. "Tomorrow," Sarah countered. "She's too fragile to move again today. Let her stabilize overnight. If she's still strong in the morning, you can make the trip." Luke wanted to argue, but Sarah was right. Hannah had drifted into unconsciousness during the worst of the treatment, and she looked more dead than alive now, her face waxy and pale against the white pillow. Only the steady rise and fall of her chest confirmed she still lived. "You did good today," Sarah said quietly, touching Luke's arm. "Most men would have ridden past, told themselves it wasn't their problem." "I heard the baby crying," Luke said, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. He stayed near the house for the rest of that day, finding reasons to check on the patient, even though Sarah had everything under control. Each time he looked in, Hannah was sleeping, Emma was sleeping, and Sarah was knitting in the chair beside the bed like a benevolent sentinel. Tom found Luke in the barn as the sun was setting, allegedly checking on a mare that didn't need checking. "Sarah says the woman's name is Hannah Miller," Tom said, settling onto a hay bale. "Says her husband is Jacob Miller. That name mean anything to you?" Luke shook his head. "Well, it should. Jacob Miller is known in Silver Creek, and not in a good way." Tom pulled out his pipe but didn't light it. He's a gambler, a drunk, and a brawler. Owes money to half the territory. I heard he married some girl from back east last year. Heard she was young and pretty and had no idea what she was getting into. That tracks with what I've seen, Luke said flatly. Question is, what happens now? Tom studied him with shrewd eyes. You rescued her. That doesn't make her your responsibility. She has nowhere else to go. The cabin's destroyed. Her husband's God knows where, doing God knows what. So you're going to, what, take care of her? Tom's tone wasn't mocking, just curious. You don't know this woman, Luke. I know she's got a broken body and a baby and a worthless husband. I know she almost died today. That's enough. Tom nodded slowly. Just be careful. Getting involved in other people's marriages, that's complicated territory. Jacob Miller might have something to say about a stranger taking an interest in his wife. Let him say it, Luke replied, surprised by the heat in his own voice. Let him come say it to my face, while I ask him why his wife and daughter were living in a death trap while he was drinking himself stupid in Silver Creek. Tom raised his hands in surrender. Just wanted to make sure you knew what you were walking into. After Tom left, Luke stayed in the barn, working through his evening chores with unusual intensity. He was currying a horse that didn't need currying when he heard the soft footsteps behind him. She's awake, Sarah said, asking for you. Luke set down the brush and followed Sarah back to the house. In the spare room, lamplight cast soft shadows across the walls. Hannah was propped up on pillows, her face still pale, but her eyes alert. Emma was awake too, nursing contentedly. You stayed, Hannah said when Luke appeared in the doorway. Wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm alive. Because of you. Her voice was stronger now, though still threaded with pain. I don't even know how to begin thanking you. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You risked your life. You could have just ridden for help, but instead you climbed into that wreckage. Why? The question was so direct, so genuinely curious that Luke found himself answering honestly. Because waiting for help would have taken too long. Because I heard your baby crying. Because... He paused, searching for words. Because it was the right thing to do. That's all. Hannah studied him for a long moment. Most men I've known don't do the right thing unless there's something in it for them. Then you've known the wrong men. Something flickered across her face, recognition maybe, or regret. Yes, she said softly. I think I have. Emma finished nursing and Hannah adjusted her clothing, wincing at the movement. Sarah swept in to take the baby, declaring that new mothers needed rest and she would watch the little one for a few hours. Alone with Hannah, Luke felt suddenly awkward. He'd been comfortable during the crisis, when there were clear actions to take and problems to solve. But now, in the quiet aftermath, he didn't know quite where to stand or what to say. Sarah says you'll take me to see the doctor tomorrow, Hannah said. To Silver Creek. If you're strong enough. I have to be. I need to... She faltered. I need to find Jacob. Let him know what happened. You think he'll care? The bluntness of the question surprised them both. Hannah's eyes widened, then filled with tears, she blinked back fiercely. I'm sorry, Luke said quickly. That was out of line. No, it was honest. Hannah's hands twisted in the blanket covering her lap. The truth is, I don't know if he'll care. I don't know much of anything anymore. When I married Jacob, he was charming and attentive. He promised me a life out west, adventure, freedom. What he didn't mention was the debt, the drinking, the days he'd disappear without explanation. Why stay? Where would I go? I have no money of my own. My family back east disowned me when I married Jacob against their wishes. And then Emma came, and suddenly leaving wasn't just about me anymore. She looked toward the door where Sarah had carried the baby. I keep thinking if I just try harder, if I'm patient enough, he'll become the man he pretended to be. Luke had heard variations of this story before. Hope was a powerful drug, especially for people who had nowhere else to place their faith. People don't change because you want them to, he said gently. They change because they want to, and only if they want to. I'm starting to understand that. Hannah's voice was barely above a whisper. Today, when that cabin was coming down around me, all I could think was that I'd been a fool, that I'd let a man's empty promises put my daughter in danger. I swore to myself that if we survived, if somehow we made it out, I would never let that happen again." "Then don't," Luke said simply. Their eyes met across the dim room. Something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Luke recognized it for what it was: dangerous, complicated, and entirely inappropriate given that Hannah was married and he'd known her for less than a day. He should leave, should wish her well and return to his uncomplicated life of horses and solitude, should forget the feel of her slight weight in his arms, the way her voice had broken when she said, "I trust you," the fierce maternal love he'd witnessed when she held her daughter. Should. Instead, Luke heard himself say, "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll go to Silver Creek. We'll find your husband, get you proper medical attention, and figure out the next steps, one thing at a time." "One thing at a time," Hannah repeated, as if testing the words. "I like that. It feels manageable." Luke left her then, closing the door softly behind him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted. The day had been impossibly long, impossibly strange. This morning he'd been checking fence lines, his biggest concern whether the north pasture could support another dozen horses. Now he was entangled in the life of a woman with broken legs, a baby, and a husband who would almost certainly be a problem. Tom had been right. This was complicated territory. But as Luke made his way to the bunkhouse in his narrow bed, he couldn't bring himself to regret the choice to get involved. Hannah Miller deserved better than what life had given her. Her daughter deserved better. And if Luke could help provide that, even temporarily, even in some small way, well, wasn't that what a decent man did? He fell asleep still thinking about Hannah's eyes, about the strength he'd seen there beneath the pain, about the way she'd called him back from the brink of walking away. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tomorrow he'd have to face Jacob Miller, navigate the politics of Silver Creek, ensure Hannah got the care she needed. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Luke Marston felt like he'd done something that mattered, like he'd been in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, like maybe his solitary, uncomplicated life had been missing something essential. He just hoped he wasn't making the biggest mistake of his life. Dawn came too early, slicing through the bunkhouse window with the kind of harsh light that tolerated no excuses. Luke had slept poorly, his dreams a tangled mess of collapsing timber and a woman's terrified screams. He woke with muscles that felt like they'd been beaten with a hammer, every movement a reminder of yesterday's exertions. His hands were the worst, palms torn and blistered from tearing through debris, knuckles scraped raw. He flexed his fingers experimentally and winced. Tom was already up, brewing coffee on the small stove that served the bunkhouse. He glanced at Luke's hands and shook his head. "Sarah's got salve for that. You should let her wrap them before you head out." "I'm fine." "You're stubborn is what you are." Tom poured 2 cups and handed one to Luke. "But that's not news. How's the woman this morning?" "Haven't checked yet." "Well, you better check soon. Sarah says if she's strong enough, you should leave for Silver Creek by mid-morning. Any later and you'll be traveling in the worst heat." Tom sipped his coffee, studying Luke over the rim of his cup. "You thought about what you're going to do when you find Jacob Miller?" Luke had thought about little else during his restless night. Tell him what happened. Tell him his wife needs proper medical care. After that, it's between them. "You really think it'll be that simple?" "No," Luke admitted. "But I'm hoping it will be." He finished his coffee and made his way to the main house. Sarah was in the kitchen, already preparing breakfast while simultaneously minding Emma, who was making delighted gurgling sounds from a makeshift playpen near the stove. "She's been awake since first light," Sarah reported. "Fed the baby, ate some broth herself. She's stronger than she looks, that one. Still in considerable pain, but managing it." Sarah fixed Luke with a knowing look. "You be careful in Silver Creek today. Jacob Miller has friends there, and not the kind you want to cross. I'm just delivering his wife to the doctor." "Mm-hmm." Sarah's tone suggested she didn't believe that for a second. "You go on in. She's been asking for you." Luke found Hannah sitting up in bed, her dark blonde hair combed and pinned back, her face scrubbed clean of yesterday's dust and blood. Someone, Sarah presumably, had found her a clean nightgown. She looked fragile as spun glass, but her eyes were alert and determined. "You came," she said, something like relief crossing her face. Said I would. Luke remained near the door, maintaining a respectful distance. How are you feeling? Like I was crushed beneath a house, Hannah said with a weak smile. But better than yesterday. Sarah's been wonderful. I don't know what I would have done without her, without both of you. Doc Brennan will get you properly sorted. He's got real medicines, can set those bones properly. Luke hesitated. You ready to go to Silver Creek? It won't be an easy trip. Hannah's jaw set in a line he was beginning to recognize, the look of a woman who'd made up her mind. I'm ready. I need to find Jacob, need to understand what we're going to do now. Her voice dropped. The cabin's gone. Everything we owned, what little we had. We'll figure it out, one thing at a time, remember? One thing at a time, she echoed, then quieter. Will you stay? In Silver Creek, I mean. While I see the doctor, I know it's asking a lot, but She stopped, seeming embarrassed. I don't know who else to ask. The vulnerability in her voice did something to Luke's carefully maintained defenses. I'll stay as long as you need. The journey to Silver Creek took 3 hours at the careful pace Luke maintained. He'd rigged a better transport than yesterday's makeshift travois, a small cart borrowed from the ranch, lined with blankets and pillows. Hannah lay on her back. Emma nestled against her side, both of them shielded from the sun by a canvas shade Luke had constructed. Every rut in the road made Hannah gasp or go silent in a way that was somehow worse than crying out. Luke walked beside the cart, leading his horse, talking when Hannah seemed to need distraction and maintaining silence when she didn't. She told him about her life before Jacob, growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a banker who'd had ambitions for her to marry well within their social circle. She'd been 19 when Jacob swept into town, all charm and Western mystique, promising adventure beyond the suffocating propriety of Eastern society. I thought I was being brave, Hannah said, staring up at the canvas shade. Thought I was choosing love over convention. My parents warned me, my friends warned me, but I was so certain I knew better. She laughed bitterly. Turns out I knew nothing at all. You were 19. Most people know nothing at 19. How old were you when you knew something? Luke considered this. Maybe 25, 26, after I'd made enough mistakes to learn from them. What kind of mistakes? He'd walked into that one. Luke watched the road ahead, choosing his words carefully. The kind where you trust the wrong people, believe in things that aren't real, think you can fix problems that aren't yours to fix. Did you fix them anyway? No. That's how I learned. Hannah was quiet for a moment, then, Sarah told me you've been at the Broken Star for 3 years, that you came from somewhere south, didn't talk much about your past. She said you're the best horseman she's ever seen, but you keep to yourself. Don't socialize in town, don't court the local girls, don't seem to want anything except to be left alone. Luke felt his jaw tighten. Sarah talks too much. She cares about you. I could hear it in her voice. Hannah shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position. The movement made her catch her breath. She said yesterday was the first time she'd seen you really engage with another person's crisis. Said usually you help from a distance, if at all. I don't know what she wants me to say to that. Nothing. I'm not asking for explanations. Hannah's voice softened. I'm just trying to understand the man who saved my life. The man I'm putting considerable trust in. You don't need to understand me. You just need to get well. They fell into silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Emma woke and fussed briefly before settling again. The landscape rolled by, scrubland giving way to grassland, the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking where water ran beneath the surface. The Montana sky stretched overhead, impossibly blue and endless. It was near noon when Silver Creek came into view. The town squatted in a shallow valley, a collection of wooden buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together by men more interested in speed than aesthetics. A single main street ran through the center, flanked by the establishments that served a frontier community's needs. General store, blacksmith, livery, 3 saloons, a hotel of dubious cleanliness, and at the far end, Doc Brennan's office marked by a weathered shingle. Luke guided the cart directly to the doctor's office, ignoring the curious stares from townspeople who'd paused in their daily business to watch. News traveled fast in small towns, and the sight of an injured woman with a baby would be all over Silver Creek within the hour. Doc Brennan was a grizzled man in his 60s, with the steady hands of someone who'd practiced medicine in places where mistakes meant death. He took one look at Hannah and started issuing orders to his nurse, a capable woman named Martha, who'd seen her share of frontier injuries. "You'll want to wait outside," Doc Brennan told Luke. "This examination needs privacy, and there's nothing you can do to help." Luke hesitated, glancing at Hannah. She gave him a small nod. "Go, find Jacob. Tell him where I am. He has a right to know." Finding Jacob Miller turned out to be easier than Luke had hoped. The third person he asked, the blacksmith, pointed him toward the Lucky Strike saloon with a knowing smirk. "Miller's there most days. Been on a particularly bad run this week. Heard he lost near everything he had." The Lucky Strike was exactly what Luke expected. Dim, smoky, smelling of stale beer and poor decisions. A dozen men occupied the space, some drinking at the bar, others hunched over card tables. Luke spotted Jacob immediately, not because he'd been described, but because the man had the look of someone who'd given up, unshaven, clothes rumpled, eyes bloodshot and vacant. He was at a corner table, nursing a whiskey, staring at nothing. 3 other men sat with him, cards forgotten as they engaged in the kind of desultory conversation that filled time between drinks. Luke approached the table. "Jacob Miller?" The man looked up slowly, focusing with effort. "Who's asking?" "Name's Luke Marston. I need to talk to you about your wife." That got everyone's attention. Jacob's companions exchanged glances while Jacob himself went very still. "What about her?" "She's at Doc Brennan's office. Your cabin collapsed yesterday. She's got 2 broken legs and broken ribs. She and your daughter nearly died." For a moment, Jacob just stared. Then he lurched to his feet, swaying slightly. "Hannah's hurt? Emma?" "The baby's fine. Hannah will recover, but she needs care. Proper care." Luke kept his voice level, but something in his tone must have conveyed judgment, because Jacob's face flushed. "I was coming back. I had business here." "Business?" Luke glanced meaningfully at the cards and empty glasses littering the table. "That the kind of business that leaves your family in a death trap?" Jacob's jaw clenched. "You got no right to talk about my family. Who the hell are you?" "I'm the man who dug them out of the rubble. The man who carried your wife 3 miles to get her help while you were drinking yourself stupid." Luke took a step closer, his voice dropping. "Your wife could have died yesterday. Your daughter could have died. Instead of being there to protect them, you were here, losing money you don't have to men who don't respect you." One of Jacob's companions, a burly man with a scar through his eyebrow, stood up. "Maybe you should leave, stranger. This is family business." "Sit down, Taggart," Jacob said wearily. The big man hesitated, then complied. Jacob looked at Luke with something that might have been shame, might have been resentment. "Where are they now?" "I told you, Doc Brennan's office." Jacob nodded slowly, then reached for his whiskey. Luke's hand shot out, catching his wrist. "Your wife's been waiting for you. The least you can do is show up sober." For a moment, tension crackled between them. Jacob was bigger than Luke, and he had friends at the table. But something in Luke's eyes, maybe the cold certainty that he would finish what he'd started, made Jacob back down. "Fine." Jacob pulled his arm free, glaring. "Let's go see my wife." They walked to Doc Brennan's office in tense silence, Jacob slightly ahead as if to establish that he didn't need Luke's guidance. People watched them pass, conversations dying and resuming in their wake. Luke could practically feel the gossip spreading like ripples in water. At the doctor's office, Martha met them at the door. "Doc's still with Mrs. Miller. You can wait here." She looked at Jacob with barely concealed disapproval. "She's been asking for you. Nice that you finally showed up." Jacob's face reddened, but he said nothing. He slumped into one of the waiting room chairs, head in his hands. Luke remained standing, arms crossed, watching the door that separated them from Hannah. After a few minutes, Jacob spoke without looking up. "I know what you think of me." "Don't matter what I think." "She told you, didn't she? About the cabin, about me being gone. About everything." Jacob's voice was thick with alcohol and self-pity. "I was going to fix it. The cabin. I had a plan." "Plans don't mean much if you don't follow through." "You don't understand. I've had bad luck, that's all. A few bad hands, some investments that didn't pan out. It's temporary. I was going to win it back, get enough money to fix the place proper. Give Hannah the life I promised. Luke had heard variations of this speech before, from men who always had an excuse for why their families suffered while they chased the next sure thing. Your wife almost died because of your bad luck. Your daughter too. What happens next time? There won't be a next time. The door opened, cutting off whatever justification Jacob was preparing. Doc Brennan emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. His expression was grave. Both legs fractured, 3 ribs broken, severe bruising, minor internal bleeding that seems to have resolved itself, he recited clinically. She's lucky to be alive. Another hour under that debris and we'd be having a different conversation. He fixed Jacob with a hard stare. She's going to need at least 6 weeks of bed rest, possibly longer. No weight on those legs until I say otherwise. Someone will need to care for her and the baby around the clock. I can do that, Jacob said quickly. I'll take care of her. Doc Brennan's skepticism was palpable. She'll need proper accommodation. That cabin of yours, what's left of it, isn't suitable. She'll need medicine, clean bandages changed daily, nutritious food. Can you provide that? Jacob's silence was answer enough. I thought not. Doc Brennan sighed. I can keep her here for a few days, but I'm not equipped for long-term care. She needs somewhere stable to recover. She can stay at the Broken Star, Luke heard himself say. We've got the room, and Sarah knows how to nurse. Both men turned to stare at him. Jacob's expression cycled through surprise, suspicion, and finally, something that looked like relief mixed with resentment. You're offering to take my wife into your home? For 6 weeks? I'm offering her a place to recover, she and the baby. Luke met Jacob's gaze steadily. Unless you've got somewhere better? The silence that followed confirmed what everyone in the room already knew. Jacob had nothing. No home, no money, no real plan beyond his next drink or card game. Can I see her? Jacob finally asked, his voice small. Doc Brennan nodded. Keep it brief. She needs rest. He looked at Luke. You should probably come too. She's been asking for you. They found Hannah propped up in the examination bed, her legs splinted and wrapped, her face drawn with pain despite whatever medication Doc Brennan had administered. Emma was sleeping in a basket beside the bed. Hannah's eyes went first to Jacob, and Luke saw something complex pass across her face. Relief, anger, disappointment, all mixed together. Jacob, she said quietly. Hannah, God, I'm so sorry. I came as soon as I heard. Is Emma? Jacob moved toward the bed, his hands fluttering uselessly. We're alive. Hannah's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. No thanks to the cabin you promised was safe. Jacob flinched. I was going to fix it. You know I was. I just needed a little more time, a little more money. You always need more time, more money, more chances. Hannah's voice remained calm, but Luke heard the steel beneath it. That cabin should never have been our home. You knew it was dangerous. You knew, and you left us there anyway while you were here, gambling away what little we had. I was trying to make things better. You were running away, like you always do when things get difficult. Hannah closed her eyes briefly as if gathering strength. I almost died yesterday, Jacob. Emma almost died. And all I could think while I was trapped under that beam was that you weren't there. You're never there when it matters. The room fell into uncomfortable silence. Jacob looked like he'd been struck, his face crumbling. I love you. I love Emma. You have to believe that. I do believe you love us, in your way. Hannah opened her eyes, and Luke was struck by the sadness there. But love isn't enough, not when it comes with broken promises and broken homes and broken bones. What are you saying? Hannah's gaze shifted to Luke, then back to her husband. Mr. Marston has offered us accommodation at the Broken Star Ranch while I recover. I'm accepting his offer. You're going to live with a stranger? A man I don't even know? He's the man who saved our lives. He's done more for Emma and me in one day than you've managed in months. Hannah's words were quiet but devastating. I'm not asking your permission, Jacob. I'm telling you what's happening. You're welcome to visit, but you're not welcome to stay unless you can prove you've changed. Really changed. This is because of him, isn't it? Jacob wheeled on Luke, his face flushing with anger and humiliation. "You show up playing the hero, and now you're stealing my family?" "Nobody's stealing anything," Luke said evenly. "Your wife needs a place to heal. I'm providing it, that's all." "That's all? You expect me to believe—" "What I expect," Luke interrupted, his voice hardening, "is for you to put your pride aside and think about what's best for your wife and daughter. Can you give them what they need right now? A safe place, proper care, stability?" Jacob's mouth opened and closed. His hands clenched into fists, but he had no answer because they all knew the truth. "I'll come visit," Jacob finally said, directing his words to Hannah. "Every day. I'll come see you and Emma." "If you're sober," Hannah replied. "I won't have you around Emma when you're drunk. That's not negotiable." The defeat in Jacob's shoulders was almost painful to witness. He nodded once, then moved to the bedside and pressed a kiss to Hannah's forehead. She allowed it but didn't return the gesture. He looked at Emma sleeping in her basket, reached out as if to touch her, then pulled back. "I'll make this right," he said. "I swear I will." "Swearing doesn't mean much anymore, Jacob. Show me through actions." After Jacob left, Doc Brennan returned to discuss Hannah's care requirements. Luke listened carefully, committing everything to memory. The medicines she'd need, the signs of infection to watch for, how often to change her bandages, exercises to prevent her leg muscles from atrophying during the long recovery. "You're taking on a considerable responsibility," Doc Brennan observed. "Most men wouldn't." "Most men didn't pull her out of that collapsed cabin. Seems wrong to save someone's life and then abandon them to poor care." "Noble of you." The doctor's tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure nobility was the full explanation. "I'll want to check on her in 3 days. After that, weekly visits should suffice unless complications arise. You can bring her here, or I can ride out to the ranch." "I'll bring her. Easier for you." They made arrangements for Hannah to stay at Doc Brennan's office overnight, one more night of observation before the journey back to the Broken Star. Luke secured a room at the hotel, took a meal at a restaurant that served passable beef and potatoes, and tried not to think too hard about what he'd just committed himself to. 6 weeks. Minimum. 6 weeks of having Hannah Miller and her infant daughter under the same roof. 6 weeks of navigating the complicated territory between helping someone and becoming too involved. 6 weeks of whatever drama Jacob would bring with his visits. Luke stared at the ceiling of his rented room that night, listening to the sounds of Silver Creek's nightlife filtering through the thin walls. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing a badly tuned piano. Men laughed drunkenly. A woman's voice rose in anger, then cut off abruptly. He thought about Hannah's eyes when she'd looked at her husband, the absence of the love that should have been there, replaced by something sadder and more resigned. He thought about the way she'd taken control of the situation, setting boundaries despite being injured and vulnerable. Strength. That's what he kept coming back to. Hannah Miller was stronger than her circumstances suggested. Morning came with the same harsh light as the previous day. Luke checked out of the hotel and returned to Doc Brennan's office. He found Hannah awake, freshly bandaged, with Emma nursing contentedly. Martha had found Hannah a proper dress to replace the ruined one from the collapse, and someone had helped her wash and pin up her hair. "Ready?" Luke asked from the doorway. "As ready as I'll ever be for another 3-hour cart ride," Hannah replied, but she was smiling slightly. "Thank you for everything, for this. I know it's asking a lot." "We've been over this. Stop thanking me." "I'll stop thanking you when I stop feeling grateful." The return journey to the Broken Star passed more easily than the trip to town had. Hannah seemed stronger, or perhaps the medicine was working better. She dozed for part of the journey, Emma sleeping against her chest. During the stretches when she was awake, they talked, carefully at first, then with increasing ease. Hannah told him about learning she was pregnant with Emma, about the mixture of joy and terror she'd felt. "I knew by then what Jacob was, but I thought maybe a baby would change him, would give him reason to be better." She laughed without humor. "How naive does that sound?" "Sounds human," Luke replied. "People want to believe those they love can change. Nothing naive about hope." "Even when hope is misplaced?" "Especially then." Hannah was quiet for a moment, watching the landscape roll past. Then, "Can I ask you something personal?" Luke tensed. You can ask. Were you ever married? No? Ever come close? He should deflect, should maintain the boundaries he'd always maintained. Instead, he found himself answering, once, long time ago, girl named Rebecca. We were going to start a ranch together down in Colorado. What happened? She met someone with better prospects, someone who could give her the life she wanted right away, not someday in the uncertain future. Luke kept his eyes on the road ahead. Turned out I was the safe choice, the backup plan. When something better came along, she took it. I'm sorry. Don't be. She did me a favor. Better to know before vows are spoken than after. Is that why you keep to yourself? Why you don't court anyone? Luke considered this. Partly. Mostly I just realized I like my own company better than most people's. Simpler that way. No expectations to disappoint, no one to disappoint you. Lonelier, though. Maybe, but lonely's a known quantity. You can plan around it. Hannah smiled sadly. I used to think loneliness was the worst thing. Then I learned you can be married and still be lonely. That's worse, somehow. Being alone by choice versus being alone in a crowded room. Luke understood exactly what she meant, though he didn't say so. They arrived at the Broken Star in late afternoon. Sarah came out to meet them, Tom behind her, and together they got Hannah settled back in the spare room. It felt almost routine now, as if this was something they'd done many times rather than twice. Sarah shooed the men out while she helped Hannah with personal matters, and Luke found himself in the barn again, seeking refuge in familiar tasks. Tom appeared an hour later, perching on a hay bale with his pipe. So Jacob Miller knows his wife is staying here? He knows. And he's fine with it? Doesn't matter if he's fine with it. It's Hannah's choice. Tom puffed thoughtfully on his pipe. Word's gonna spread. You know that, right? Small community like this, people are gonna talk about a married woman living under another man's roof. Let them talk. Hannah needs a place to heal. We've got the space. Simple as that. Nothing's ever simple when it comes to a woman, Luke. Especially not a married woman with a jealous husband. Jacob didn't seem all that jealous, seemed more relieved someone else was solving his problems. For now, but men like Jacob Miller, they're unpredictable. Fine one day, violent the next, especially when they've been drinking. Tom fixed Luke with a serious look. You watch yourself, and you be careful about boundaries. However innocent your intentions, people will assume the worst. I know. Do you? Because I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her. And I've known you 3 years. Luke stiffened. I barely know her. That's not what I said. I said you look at her a certain way, like she matters. Tom stood, stretching. Just be careful, that's all I'm saying. Caring about someone, really caring, that makes you vulnerable. Makes you do things you wouldn't normally do. After Tom left, Luke continued working long past when the work needed doing. He repaired tack that didn't need repairing, organized tools that were already organized, did anything to avoid going back to the house and the questions waiting there. But eventually, darkness fell and hunger drove him inside. In the kitchen, Sarah had laid out a cold supper: bread, cheese, sliced ham, pickled vegetables. She'd made up plates and left them covered, a note in her precise handwriting, one for you, one for Hannah. She's resting, but said she'd eat if you brought it to her. Luke stood in the quiet kitchen, looking at those 2 plates, understanding the significance of what Sarah was doing. She was normalizing this situation, making it routine, removing the awkwardness of Luke having to ask if he should bring Hannah food. He picked up both plates and headed to the spare room. The door was ajar, lamplight spilling into the hallway. He knocked softly. Come in, Hannah called. She was sitting up in bed, Emma asleep in the crib beside her. Hannah had been reading. One of Sarah's books lay open on her lap. She looked better than she had that morning, some color back in her face. Sarah sent dinner, Luke said, bringing in the plates. That woman is an angel. I don't know what sins I committed to deserve her kindness after all my poor choices. Luke set the plates on the small table beside the bed, then pulled up the chair. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that forms between people who've shared something significant. Jacob came by while you were in the barn, Hannah said eventually. Stayed maybe 10 minutes. He was sober, which is progress. Held Emma, asked about my pain level, promised he'd visit again tomorrow. That's good. Is it? Hannah set down her fork. I don't know what I want from him anymore. Part of me hopes he'll change, become the man I thought I married. Part of me knows that's impossible. People are who they are. You said yourself, people only change if they want to. Do you think he wants to? Luke considered this carefully. I think he wants to. But wanting to want something isn't the same as actually wanting it, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Hannah looked at her sleeping daughter. I need to think about Emma's future, about what kind of life I can give her, about whether staying with Jacob is the right choice or just the easy one. Those are hard questions, made harder by the fact that I have no money, no family to turn to, no real prospects beyond hoping my husband decides to be decent. Hannah's voice was bitter. You know what the worst part is? I had opportunities. Before Jacob, I had suitors from good families, men who would have provided stability. But I thought that was boring. I wanted passion, adventure, romance. You were 19. That's not an excuse. I made my choice. I chose poorly. Now Emma pays the price for my poor judgment. Luke set down his own plate and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Listen to me. You didn't make Emma pay for anything. You survived a building collapse. You protected your daughter with your own body. You're making hard choices to ensure she has a better future. That's not poor judgment. That's courage. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I don't feel courageous. I feel terrified. I feel trapped. I feel like I've made such a mess of everything. Then you're human. Welcome to the club. Luke handed her his handkerchief. But being terrified doesn't mean you're not also brave. Sometimes the bravest thing is admitting you're scared and moving forward anyway. She wiped her eyes, laughing shakily. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I've just made enough mistakes to recognize them in other people. They finished their meal, the conversation drifting to lighter topics. Emma's developing personality, Sarah's terrible jokes, the ornery mare in the barn who'd tried to bite Luke 3 times that week. By the time Luke collected the empty plates, the heaviness had lifted somewhat from Hannah's expression. At the door, he paused. You need anything during the night, you call out. My room's just down the hall. Luke? Hannah's voice stopped him. Thank you. Not just for the food or the room, for treating me like I'm more than just someone's wife, like I'm a person who matters. You do matter, Luke said simply. Then, before the moment could become more than he was ready for, he left, closing the door softly behind him. In his own room, Luke lay in the darkness and listened to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Horses shifting in their stalls, the wind in the cottonwoods, the creak of old timber. Tom was right about one thing. He was vulnerable now in a way he hadn't been in years. Hannah and Emma weren't just guests recovering from an accident. They were people he'd begun to care about, to feel responsible for. And that caring created complications he couldn't fully anticipate. But as Luke drifted toward sleep, he found he didn't regret the choice to help. Whatever came next, whatever drama Jacob brought, whatever gossip the community generated, whatever his own conflicted feelings developed into, he'd face it. Because some choices were right even when they were complicated. Some people were worth the risk of vulnerability. And Hannah Miller, with her fierce maternal love and quiet strength and determination to build a better life for her daughter, was one of those people. Luke just hoped he was strong enough to navigate whatever came next without losing himself in the process. The days that followed established a rhythm that felt both natural and strange. Luke rose before dawn as always, tended to the horses, worked the fence lines and training routines that defined ranch life. But now his mornings also included checking on Hannah, bringing her breakfast, asking after her pain levels and Emma's health. Sarah handled most of the intimate care, the bandage changes, the bathing, the women's matters Luke had no business being involved in, but somehow he found himself drawn to that spare room multiple times each day. Hannah was healing, though slowly. The bones would knit in their own time, Doc Brennan had said during his first follow-up visit. The ribs were already improving. She could breathe more deeply without the sharp pain that had characterized those first days. But the legs would take weeks, possibly months, before she could put full weight on them. In the meantime, she was confined to bed, or, on good days, to the chair by the window that Tom had carried in so she could watch the ranch activity outside. Jacob came every few days, his visits marked by an awkwardness that permeated the entire house. He'd arrive mid-morning, usually smelling of whiskey, even when he wasn't actively drunk, and sit with Hannah for an hour or two. Luke made a point of being elsewhere during these visits, giving them privacy even though he could sense the tension from across the property. Tom reported that the visits always followed the same pattern. Jacob would arrive full of apologies and promises, Hannah would listen with increasing skepticism, and he'd leave looking more defeated than when he'd arrived. It was during the third week that things began to shift in ways Luke hadn't anticipated. He'd brought Hannah her breakfast as usual, finding her already awake and staring out the window with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Jacob didn't come yesterday," she said without preamble. "Or the day before. That makes 5 days." Luke set down the tray. "You want me to ride into Silver Creek? Check on him?" "No." Hannah's voice was firm. "If he cares enough, he'll come. If he doesn't—" She trailed off, her hands twisting in the blanket across her lap. "I've been thinking. About everything. About what happens when I'm healed enough to leave here." Something tightened in Luke's chest, though he couldn't have said whether it was relief or disappointment. "What have you decided?" "I don't know yet. That's the problem." Hannah looked at him then, her eyes searching his face. "Can I ask you something? And will you promise to answer honestly, not just tell me what you think I want to hear? I've never told you anything but the truth." "I know. That's why I'm asking." Hannah took a breath. "Do you think I should go back to Jacob? If he gets his act together, proves he's changed, do you think I should give him another chance?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications Luke didn't want to examine too closely. He pulled up the chair and sat, buying time to formulate an answer that was honest without being inappropriately personal. "I think," he said carefully, "that only you can answer that. I don't know your whole history with Jacob. Don't know what he was like when you married him, what promises were made, what your life together looked like before things went wrong. That's a politician's answer. You want my gut feeling?" "Yes." Luke met her gaze directly. "My gut says that a man who leaves his wife and infant daughter in a collapsing cabin while he drinks and gambles isn't a man who's going to change just because his wife got hurt. My gut says that the promises Jacob makes are the kind that sound good in the moment, but evaporate when they become inconvenient. My gut says you and Emma deserve better than hoping someday he'll become the man he should have been all along." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. "You don't pull your punches, do you?" "You asked for honesty." "I did." She smiled slightly. "And I appreciate it, even when the truth is hard to hear." She picked up her fork, pushing eggs around her plate. "My mother used to say that the hardest thing about making a mistake is admitting it. Not to other people, but to yourself. Admitting you were wrong, that you wasted time and energy on something that was never going to work." "That what you think? That marrying Jacob was a mistake?" "I think marrying Jacob gave me Emma, so it can't be entirely a mistake. But staying with him?" Hannah set down her fork. "Yes, I think continuing to hope he'll change when all evidence suggests otherwise. That's a mistake I've been making for too long." Luke felt something shift in the air between them, some fundamental change in the dynamic that had existed since that first day in the collapsed cabin. This wasn't just a woman recovering from injury anymore. This was a woman making decisions about her future. And somehow, without quite understanding how it happened, Luke found himself invested in what those decisions might be. Emma chose that moment to wake from her nap, her small cries cutting through the heavy conversation. Hannah reached for her daughter, and Luke watched as she lifted the baby with practiced ease, despite her own injuries. The love in that gesture, the unconscious protectiveness, did something to his carefully guarded heart. "I should let you two be," Luke said, standing. "You need anything, just call out." "Luke?" Hannah's voice stopped him at the door again. It was becoming a pattern. "Thank you for being honest. I needed to hear that." The conversation stayed with Luke throughout the day, through the work with the horses and the afternoon heat and the evening chores. Tom noticed his distraction, made a few pointed comments about men who let their minds wander around dangerous animals, but Luke barely registered them. He was thinking about Hannah's question, about the weight of honesty, about the fact that he'd essentially told a married woman she should leave her husband. That evening, after supper, Sarah cornered him in the barn. She had that look on her face, the one that said she was about to meddle and didn't particularly care if he wanted her to or not. "We need to talk about Hannah," she said without preamble. "What about her?" "About what happens next. She's healing well, better than expected, honestly. In another 3 or 4 weeks, she'll be mobile enough to leave if she wants to." Sarah crossed her arms. "Question is, where will she go?" Luke busied himself with a bridle that didn't need adjusting. "That's for her to figure out." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, she's got precious few options. Can't go back to that cabin. It's rubble. Can't afford accommodation in town. No money. Her husband's barely scraping by himself, certainly can't support a family. So what does that leave?" "I don't know, Sarah. What are you getting at?" "I'm getting at the fact that if Hannah leaves here, she's got nowhere to go except back to Jacob. And that man—" Sarah shook her head. "He came by yesterday while you were out on the range, drunk at 10 in the morning, demanding to see his wife. I turned him away, told him to come back sober, or not at all. He got angry, said some choice words about me and Tom and you especially." Luke's jaw tightened. "What kind of words?" "The kind that suggest he thinks there's something improper happening between you and Hannah. The kind that could turn violent if he works himself up enough." Sarah's expression was worried. "Tom's thinking we might need to bar him from the property entirely, for everyone's safety." "Hannah should make that call, not us. Hannah's in no position to protect herself from a drunk, angry man, not with 2 broken legs." Sarah moved closer, her voice dropping. "I know you care about her. Anyone with eyes can see it. And before you deny it, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with caring, but you need to think ahead, Luke. Think about what you're willing to offer and what you're not, because that woman is going to need somewhere to go, someone to depend on. And if you're not prepared to be that person, you need to step back now before anyone gets hurt worse than they already are." The words hit harder than Luke wanted to admit. Sarah was right. He'd been avoiding thinking about the future, focusing only on the immediate needs of Hannah's recovery. But recovery had an endpoint, and then what? What happened when Hannah was healed and had to make real decisions about her life? "I'm not trying to be cruel," Sarah continued, her tone softening. "I'm trying to be practical. Tom and we've talked about it. If Hannah needs somewhere to stay long-term, somewhere safe, she's welcome here. We could use help around the house anyway, and she could work off her keep once she's mobile. But that's only a temporary solution. Eventually, she'll need something more permanent." "Like what?" Sarah gave him a long look. "Like a real home. Like a family that's actually hers. Like a man who'll stand by her and that baby, who'll give them the stability they need." She paused. "Like someone who pulls them out of collapsed buildings and carries them 3 miles to safety and looks at them like they hung the moon, even when he thinks nobody's watching." Luke felt heat creep up his neck. "Sarah, don't Sarah me. I've known you 3 years, and I've never seen you care about anything as much as you care about what happens to Hannah Miller. So you need to ask yourself what you're going to do about it." She turned to leave, then looked back. "Just remember, she's married. Legally, morally, married. And unless that changes, there's only so far any of this can go without causing a whole heap of trouble for everyone involved." After Sarah left, Luke stood alone in the dimly lit barn, her words echoing in his head. He knew she was right. Knew he'd crossed some invisible line from helpful stranger to something more complicated. Knew that his feelings for Hannah had evolved beyond simple compassion into territory he had no business exploring. But knowing didn't change the facts. It didn't change the way his day felt incomplete until he'd checked on her. Didn't change the way her smile made something warm unfold in his chest. Didn't change the fact that somewhere along the way, Hannah and Emma had stopped being obligations and become something closer to the family he'd never let himself want. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Luke was working with a particularly stubborn yearling when Tom called out that someone was coming up the drive. 2 someones, actually. A man and a woman in a modest buggy, dressed in the kind of practical clothing that marked them as townspeople rather than ranchers. Luke tied off the yearling and walked to meet them. The man was middle-aged, lean and weathered, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. The woman beside him was younger, perhaps 30, with dark hair and the sort of no-nonsense expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. "Help you folks?" Luke asked. "We're looking for Hannah Miller," the man said. "Heard she was staying here. I'm Peter Walsh, run the general store in Silver Creek. This is my daughter, Catherine. He hesitated. Well, we're friends of Hannah's. We're trying to be, anyway. Something in Luke relaxed slightly. She's inside. I'll let her know you're here. He found Hannah in her usual spot by the window, Emma playing with a rag doll on the bed beside her. You've got visitors, Luke said. Peter Walsh and his daughter Catherine from the general store. Hannah's face lit up in a way Luke had never seen. Peter's here? And Catherine? Oh, I haven't seen them since... She stopped herself, looking down. Since before everything fell apart. I wasn't sure they'd still want to know me. Why wouldn't they? Because I married Jacob against everyone's advice. Because I cut myself off from anyone who tried to warn me about him. Because I was prideful and stupid, and... Hannah shook her head. Never mind. Can you help me to the parlor? I don't want them to see me like this, stuck in bed like an invalid. Between Luke and Sarah, they got Hannah settled on the parlor sofa, her legs elevated, Emma in her arms. Peter and Catherine were ushered in, and Luke watched as Hannah's face transformed with genuine happiness. Peter, Catherine, I can't believe you came all this way, Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion. Of course we came, Peter replied, taking the chair across from her. When we heard about the cabin collapse, about your injuries, Hannah, we've been so worried. I wanted to come sooner, but I wasn't sure if... He glanced at Luke, uncertain. If you'd be welcome, Hannah finished. You're always welcome, both of you. I'm the one who cut off contact, not you. Catherine leaned forward, her expression intense. We brought some things, clothes for you and the baby, some books, food supplies. Peter wanted to bring half the store, but I convinced him that might be excessive. You didn't have to... Yes, we did, Peter interrupted gently. Hannah, you were one of the first people who was kind to Catherine when she came to Silver Creek. When everyone else was gossiping about why a single woman would move to a frontier town, you treated her like a person, like a friend. That meant something. Luke found himself reevaluating the woman on his sofa. There were depths to Hannah Miller he was only beginning to understand. Kindnesses she'd shown to others. Connections she'd made before Jacob had isolated her. The visit stretched into the afternoon. Luke made himself scarce, giving Hannah privacy with her friends, but he couldn't help noticing how animated she became, how the sadness that usually shadowed her features lifted. Sarah served tea and those terrible cookies she insisted on making, and the sound of genuine laughter floated out from the parlor for the first time since Hannah had arrived. It was nearly evening when Peter and Catherine prepared to leave. Luke helped Peter load some items back into the buggy, things they'd brought that Hannah insisted she didn't need or couldn't accept. She's doing well here, Peter observed, watching Luke work. Better than I expected, given everything. Sarah's good at nursing. Hannah's strong. That she is. Stronger than Jacob ever deserved. Peter's expression darkened. I suppose you've met him by now. Unfortunately. Then you know what kind of man he is. What kind of man he's always been, though he hid it well enough at first. Peter shook his head. I tried to warn her. Catherine tried. But Hannah was so sure she knew better, so determined to prove her family wrong about coming west. By the time she realized her mistake, she was married and pregnant and trapped. She's talking about leaving him, Luke said, not sure why he was sharing this with a near stranger, except that Peter clearly cared about Hannah's welfare. Good, she should. Peter's tone was firm. A man who'd leave his family in that death trap doesn't deserve a second chance. But leaving's easier said than done when you've got no money and nowhere to go. She's got somewhere. Here, for as long as she needs. Peter studied Luke with new interest. That's generous of you. Also potentially complicated. Everyone keeps telling me that. Because it's true. People talk, Mr. Marston. Especially in small communities. A married woman living under an unmarried man's roof, that's fodder for gossip even when everything's innocent. Peter's tone wasn't judgmental, just practical. I'm not saying it's right or fair. I'm just saying be prepared for it. After they left, Luke found Hannah back in her room, Emma asleep in the crib beside her. She was holding one of the books Catherine had brought, but she wasn't reading it, just staring at the cover with an expression of such profound loneliness that Luke almost turned around and left her to her privacy. But something made him knock on the doorframe. You all right? I'm fine. Better than fine. It was wonderful to see them. But her voice broke on the last word, and suddenly she wasn't fine at all. She was crying, shoulders shaking with the kind of deep sobs that came from a place of profound grief. Luke crossed the room without thinking, sitting on the edge of the bed and awkwardly patting her shoulder. Hannah turned into the touch, pressing her face against his shirt, and Luke found his arms going around her, holding her while she cried out weeks of accumulated pain and fear and loneliness. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I don't know why It was such a nice visit. I should be happy." "Sometimes nice things remind us of what we've been missing," Luke said quietly. "Nothing wrong with that. I've been so lonely for so long. Even before the cabin collapsed, I was lonely. Jacob was never really there, never really present, even when he was physically in the room. And I couldn't talk to anyone because I was too proud to admit I'd made such a terrible mistake." The words tumbled out between sobs. Seeing Peter and Catherine today, remembering what it felt like to have real friends, people who actually cared, it just made me realize how empty my life had become. Luke let her cry, offering no platitudes or false assurances. Sometimes people just needed to be heard, to have their pain acknowledged. His shirt was soaked through by the time Hannah's sobs subsided into hiccups, but he didn't care. "I'm a mess," Hannah finally said, pulling back and wiping at her eyes. "Look at me, crying all over you like some pathetic—" "You're not pathetic, you're human." Luke handed her his handkerchief. He'd started carrying two since Hannah had a habit of needing them. "And you've been through hell. You're allowed to fall apart sometimes." Hannah laughed shakily. "You're very kind, kinder than I deserve." "Stop saying things like that, like you don't deserve basic human decency. It's hard not to when I made such poor choices." "Poor choices don't make you a bad person. They make you a person who made poor choices. There's a difference." Luke stood, needing some distance before he said or did something he'd regret. "You need anything? More tea? Food? Want me to fetch Sarah?" "No, I just—" Hannah looked up at him, her eyes still wet. "Will you stay? Just for a bit? I don't want to be alone right now." So Luke stayed. He pulled the chair closer to the bed and they talked, really talked, in a way they hadn't before. Hannah told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her mother's strictness and her father's emotional distance, about feeling suffocated by expectations and propriety. She told him about the books she'd read that filled her head with romantic notions of the West, about how she'd imagined herself as a pioneer woman, strong and independent and free. "The reality's been somewhat different," she said with bitter humor. "Turns out independence requires resources I don't have. Turns out the West isn't romantic when you're living in a collapsing cabin with a husband who'd rather drink than provide." "What would you do?" Luke asked. "If you could do anything, if money and circumstances weren't factors, what would you want your life to look like?" Hannah was quiet for a long time, considering. "I'd want a home, a real one, solid and safe. I'd want work that mattered, maybe teaching. I'm good with children. I'd want Emma to grow up knowing she's loved and protected, that she can depend on the people around her." She paused. "And I'd want a partner. A real one, someone who shows up, who keeps his promises, who sees me as more than just a convenience or a burden." "That's not too much to ask, isn't it? Seems like asking for the moon from where I'm sitting." "Maybe you've just been asking the wrong person." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Hannah's eyes met Luke's, and something passed between them, recognition, possibility, danger. Luke saw the moment she understood what he was implying, saw her face flush and her breath catch. "Luke!" A knock on the front door broke the moment. They both jumped, guilt flooding through Luke even though they'd done nothing wrong. He stood quickly, nearly knocking over the chair. "I should get that." "Of course. Yes. Thank you for listening." Luke fled, cursing himself for his lack of control, for letting things get too personal, too intimate. At the front door, he found Jacob Miller swaying on the porch, clearly drunk, his face flushed with anger. "Where is she?" Jacob demanded, pushing past Luke into the house. "Where's my wife?" "Jacob, you need to leave. Come back when you're sober." "Don't tell me when I can see my own wife." Jacob's voice was rising, slurring. Been hearing things. People talking in town. Saying my Hannah's shacking up with some cowboy, playing house while I'm... You're drunk and you're leaving. Luke's voice was flat, dangerous. Now. You gonna make me? Jacob squared up, fists clenched. He was bigger than Luke, had the advantage of size and inebriated rage, but Luke had sobriety and training, and a cold fury at seeing this man, this pathetic excuse for a husband, show up drunk and belligerent to a house where his injured wife was recovering, where she belongs. That's her choice to make, not yours, not mine, hers. There is no choice. We're married. That means something. Does it? The words came from behind Jacob. Hannah had somehow gotten herself to the parlor, was leaning heavily against the doorframe, her face pale but her voice steady. Does being married mean something to you, Jacob? Because from where I stand, it hasn't meant much for a long time. Jacob spun around, nearly losing his balance. Hannah, baby, you don't understand. These people are poisoning you against me, turning you against your own husband. Nobody's poisoning me. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in months. Hannah's voice was sad but firm. You need to leave, Jacob. Come back when you're sober, when you can have a civil conversation, but you don't get to come here drunk and make demands. Not anymore. You're choosing him over me? Is that what this is? Jacob pointed accusingly at Luke. You're spreading your legs for... Luke moved before he could think, his fist connecting with Jacob's jaw with a satisfying crack. Jacob went down hard, blood blooming from his split lip. Tom was there instantly, grabbing Luke's arm before he could hit Jacob again. That's enough, Tom said quietly. He's not worth it. Jacob struggled to his feet, touching his bleeding mouth with shaking fingers. You'll regret that, both of you. I'll tell everyone. I'll make sure the whole territory knows what kind of woman you really are, Hannah. What kind of whore? Get out. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She'd appeared with Tom's shotgun, not pointing it at anyone but making her presence known. Get off our property and don't come back. Ever. You want to see your wife? You send word through Peter Walsh and we'll arrange it in town. But you set foot on this ranch again, I'll shoot you myself. Jacob looked around at their faces. Luke's cold fury, Tom's ready stance, Sarah's unwavering determination, Hannah's sad resolve. Whatever he saw there convinced him. He backed toward the door, still bleeding, still drunk, but apparently sober enough to recognize he was outnumbered. This isn't over, he muttered. She's still my wife. Still mine. Then he was gone, stumbling down the porch steps and into the darkness. They heard him ride off, the hoofbeats fading into the night. In the sudden silence, everyone seemed to realize they'd been holding their breath. Hannah was the first to move, taking a shaky step before her legs gave out. Luke caught her, lifting her easily despite his own trembling adrenaline. He carried her back to her room, Sarah following close behind with Emma, who'd started crying during the confrontation. I'm sorry, Hannah was saying over and over. I'm so sorry. I never meant to bring this kind of trouble to your home. Hush now, Sarah soothed, taking Emma and rocking the baby. This isn't your fault. That man's been heading down this path for a long time. You just happened to be in the way. Luke set Hannah gently on the bed, his hands lingering on her shoulders longer than strictly necessary. She's right. None of this is on you. He called me. Hannah couldn't finish, tears streaming down her face again. The things he said, drunk words from a drunk man, Luke said firmly. Don't give them power. But they all knew the damage was done. Jacob's accusations, however unfounded, would spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. The gossip that had been merely speculative would now have the fuel of a jealous husband's rage. Hannah's reputation, already tenuous, would be shredded, and Luke's involvement, however innocent, would be painted in the worst possible light. After Sarah finally got both Hannah and Emma settled for the night, she found Luke on the porch, staring out at the darkness where Jacob had disappeared. You hit him, she observed mildly. Yeah. Felt good, I imagine. In the moment, Luke flexed his sore hand. Now I'm thinking it was probably stupid. Gave him ammunition. Maybe. But sometimes a man needs hitting. Sarah settled into the chair beside him. What happens now? I don't know. Nothing good, probably. Will you ask her to leave? To protect the ranch's reputation? Luke had been asking himself the same question. The practical answer was yes, send Hannah to town, distance himself from the situation, let her figure out her marriage without his interference. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. No, he said finally. She stays as long as she needs to stay. Even if it costs you? Even then. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, you love her. It wasn't a question. Luke didn't bother denying it, didn't even try. Doesn't matter what I feel. She's married, she's got a daughter, she's got enough problems without adding me to them. Love doesn't care about practicality, Luke. You of all people should know that. Which is exactly why it doesn't matter. The last thing Hannah needs is me complicating her life further. Luke stood, suddenly exhausted. I'm going to check the horses. Then I'm turning in. But sleep wouldn't come. Luke lay in his narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the house, thinking about Hannah's tears and Jacob's rage, and the mess that kept getting messier. He thought about Sarah's accusation, "You love her," and couldn't quite bring himself to examine whether it was true. What he felt for Hannah was complicated, tangled up with protectiveness and admiration, and something deeper he didn't have words for. Whether that was love or just proximity, whether it was real or just the intensity of their circumstances, he couldn't say. What he did know was that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Word of Jacob's drunken confrontation would spread, people would talk, and somehow Luke would have to navigate the impossible space between helping Hannah and not making everything worse. He just hoped he was strong enough for what came next. Morning came with a cold rain that matched Luke's mood. He'd finally fallen asleep near dawn, only to wake 2 hours later feeling like he'd been trampled by horses. His hand throbbed where he'd hit Jacob, the knuckles swollen and bruised. A fitting reminder of his loss of control, of how close he'd come to doing real damage. Tom was already in the barn when Luke arrived, mucking out stalls with the methodical efficiency of a man who'd done this work for 40 years. He glanced at Luke's hand but said nothing, which was somehow worse than a lecture would have been. They worked in silence for an hour before Tom finally spoke. Sarah wants you to know that Hannah barely slept, kept Emma up most of the night crying. Sarah gave her some of that tea Doc Brennan left, the one with the sedative, and she finally dozed off around sunrise. Luke stabbed his pitchfork into the hay with more force than necessary. Jacob say anything else after he left? Do anything? Not that I heard. But I've been expecting him to come back with friends, make more trouble. Man like that doesn't take humiliation well. Tom paused. Peter Walsh stopped by early this morning, said he heard about the confrontation, news travels fast, and wanted to check on Hannah. He also wanted to warn you. Warn me about what? Jacob's been at the Lucky Strike since last night, telling anyone who'll listen that you stole his wife, that Hannah's having an affair, that Emma might not even be his daughter, that you and her planned the whole thing from the beginning. Tom's expression was grim. Most folks know Jacob's full of hot air when he's drunk, but some of it sticks, Luke. Some people will believe it just because it's interesting. Luke felt sick. Hannah doesn't deserve this. No, she doesn't, but that's the reality of it. Woman leaves her husband. Whether she's got cause or not, she's the one who gets judged. Fair's got nothing to do with it. Tom set down his pitchfork. Peter said something else. Said there might be a solution if you're willing to hear it. What kind of solution? The legal kind. Apparently Doc Brennan's been documenting Hannah's injuries, the circumstances of how she got them, the neglect, the dangerous living conditions. Peter thinks if Hannah wanted to, she could petition for a legal separation. Maybe even a divorce, though that's harder. Takes time and money and a judge who's sympathetic. Luke turned this over in his mind. She'd need a lawyer, need to go through courts. That costs money she doesn't have. Peter's willing to help with that. He's got some savings, and Catherine apparently has money of her own from a small inheritance. They want to help Hannah if she's serious about leaving Jacob. Tom studied Luke carefully. Question is whether you're willing to support her through that. Because it's going to get uglier before it gets better. Jacob will fight it. He'll drag her name through the mud, make accusations, try to turn public opinion against her. Anyone standing beside her is going to get caught in that storm. I don't care about public opinion. You say that now. But when the church ladies won't talk to you in town, when men you've known for years won't meet your eyes, when business suffers because people think you're a homewrecker, you might feel different. Luke met Tom's gaze squarely. I won't feel different. Hannah needs help. She needs someone on her side. If that someone's got to be me, then that's what it is. Tom nodded slowly, something like approval crossing his weathered face. Just wanted to make sure you'd thought it through. This isn't just about pulling someone out of a collapsed building anymore. This is about standing with her through a long, messy fight. That's a different kind of commitment. I know what it is. After finishing his morning work, Luke steeled himself and knocked on Hannah's door. Sarah answered, looking exhausted. She's awake. Been asking for you, actually. I'll give you two some privacy. She slipped past him with a meaningful look. Hannah was sitting up in bed, Emma in her arms, both of them looking fragile in the gray morning light. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she'd aged years overnight. Luke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. About last night. About everything. He pulled up the chair, noting how she flinched slightly as if expecting him to yell, as if she thought he might be angry with her for Jacob's behavior. You've got nothing to apologize for. Yes, I do. This is my mess, my mistake in marrying him, and now you're caught up in it, your reputation being destroyed because of me. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. The things he said about us, about me, people will believe them, Luke. They'll think the worst because that's what people do. And you don't deserve that. You've been nothing but kind and honorable, and now you're being painted as someone who cares what happens to you. Yeah, I can live with that. Luke leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Listen to me. Whatever Jacob says, whatever gossip spreads through town, I don't care. What I care about is that you and Emma are safe, that you've got a chance at a better life than what Jacob was giving you. But your reputation, my reputation's my business to worry about. Yours is more important right now. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Tom talked to Peter Walsh this morning. Peter thinks you've got grounds for a legal separation from Jacob, maybe even a divorce if you want to go that far. He's offering to help with the legal costs. Hannah's eyes widened. Peter would do that? Why? Because he's your friend. Because he knows what kind of man Jacob is and what kind of woman you are. Luke hesitated. But I'm not going to lie to you. It won't be easy. Jacob will fight it. The process will be long and painful, and you'll need somewhere stable to live while it's happening, somewhere Jacob can't harass you. You mean here, if you're willing, if you can stand a few more months of people talking. Luke watched her face carefully. But I want you to understand something. This isn't charity. Sarah wasn't exaggerating when she said we could use help around the ranch. Once you're mobile, there's work you can do, bookkeeping, cooking, helping with the horses if you're comfortable with them. You'd be earning your keep, not taking handouts. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Emma. The baby had fallen back asleep, her small fist curled against her mother's chest. I never imagined my life would come to this. Dependent on the kindness of near strangers, fighting my own husband in court, trying to build something from nothing. Sometimes life doesn't go the way we imagined. Doesn't mean it's over. Just means it's different. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's hard as hell. But hard doesn't mean impossible. Luke stood, needing to move before he said something he couldn't take back. You think about it. Talk to Peter if you want more details about the legal side. But whatever you decide, you've got a place here as long as you need it. Luke? Hannah's voice stopped him at the door yet again. This was becoming their ritual. Why are you doing this? Really, you barely know me. You don't owe me anything. He turned back, meeting her eyes. Maybe I'm just doing what someone should have done a long time ago, looking out for someone who deserves better than what she got. The next few days brought an uneasy calm. Jacob didn't return to the ranch, though reports filtered back through town that he was still drinking heavily and spreading his accusations. Hannah spent hours in conversation with Peter Walsh, who rode out to the ranch with paperwork and legal documents that needed her signature. Catherine came too, bringing more supplies and, more importantly, moral support. Luke watched Hannah transform during these visits. The defeated woman who'd cried herself to sleep was gradually replaced by someone harder, more determined. She pored over the legal documents with fierce concentration, asked sharp questions about her rights and options, made decisions with a clarity that surprised everyone, including herself. I want a divorce, she told Peter during one visit, her voice steady. Not just a separation, I want to be done with Jacob Miller completely. I want Emma to have a chance at a real family, and she can't have that while I'm still legally tied to a man who's never going to be a real father. Peter had explained the challenges. Montana Territory had strict divorce laws, required proof of extreme cruelty or abandonment, could take months or even years to finalize. But Hannah was undeterred. She had proof of neglect, of the dangerous conditions Jacob had forced them to live in, of his gambling and drinking. Doc Brennan's medical reports documented her injuries in clinical detail. The collapsed cabin was physical evidence of Jacob's failure to provide basic safety. It won't be pleasant, Peter warned. Jacob will have to be served papers. There will be a hearing. He'll likely contest it, make counter-accusations. The judge will scrutinize every aspect of your life, including your current living arrangements. Let him scrutinize, Hannah said, her jaw set. I've got nothing to hide. I'm living under the roof of decent people who've shown me more kindness in a few weeks than my husband managed in a year of marriage. If that's scandalous, then I guess I'm scandalous. Luke, listening from the hallway where he'd been passing with a load of firewood, felt something fierce and proud swell in his chest. This was the real Hannah Miller, not the broken woman from the collapsed cabin, but someone with steel in her spine and fire in her heart. The paperwork was filed on a Wednesday. By Friday, the whole territory seemed to know. Luke went into Silver Creek for supplies and felt the weight of stairs, heard the whispered conversations that died when he approached. Mrs. Henderson from the church actually crossed the street to avoid him. Bill Travis from the feed store, who'd always been friendly, was suddenly curt and businesslike. At the Lucky Strike, Luke had stopped in against his better judgment. Drawn by some perverse need to face the gossip head-on, the conversations were less subtle. Heard his wife's divorcing him, one man was saying to his companions. Shameful, if you ask me. Woman's got no call to break her marriage vows just because times get hard. Times get hard? Another snorted. Miller left her in a death trap. Cabin collapsed on her and the baby. Could have killed them both. Still, there's ways to handle marital problems that don't involve running to another man's bed. Luke's hands clenched around his whiskey glass. He should leave. Starting another fight would only make things worse. But the words kept coming, each one a fresh insult to Hannah's character. I heard the Cowboy's been living under the same roof as her for weeks now. You telling me nothing's happened, with her husband gone and her needing comfort? She's got a baby. What kind of woman brings a baby into that situation? The kind who was looking for a way out and found herself a convenient rescuer. Luke set down his glass with enough force to crack it. The conversations around him died. He turned to face the men who'd been talking, keeping his voice level with effort. You want to insult a woman who nearly died protecting her child? You do it when I'm not in earshot. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem. One of the men, a miner named Garrett with a reputation for meanness, stood up. Or what? You'll hit me like you hit Miller? That your solution to everything? Violence? Jacob Miller came to my ranch drunk and belligerent, made threats, said things about his wife that no decent man would tolerate. Yeah, I hit him. I'd do it again. Luke took a step forward. But I noticed none of you were there when that cabin collapsed. None of you pulled Hannah and her baby from the rubble. None of you offered them a place to recover. But you're real quick to judge now that someone else did the right thing. The right thing? Garrett laughed harshly. That what you call it? Taking another man's wife into your home? I call it basic human decency. Something you might want to try sometime. The bartender, a man named Sullivan, who'd always been fair, spoke up before things could escalate. That's enough. Garrett, you want to run your mouth, do it outside. This is a place of business, not a boxing ring. Garrett glared but backed down. Luke finished his drink and left, feeling the weight of hostile stares on his back. Outside, the afternoon sun was harsh and unforgiving. He loaded his supplies onto his horse, hands shaking slightly with suppressed anger. Mr. Marston? Luke turned to find Catherine Walsh approaching, her expression concerned. I saw you come out of the Lucky Strike, heard some of what was being said. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. It's going to get worse before it gets better. People in small towns, they need someone to gossip about. Right now, you and Hannah are the most interesting story they've got. I can handle gossip. Can you? Can Sarah and Tom? Because this doesn't just affect you. It affects everyone at the Broken Star. Catherine's expression was sympathetic but realistic. I'm not saying you're wrong to help Hannah. I think what you're doing is admirable, but you need to be prepared for the consequences. What kind of consequences? The social kind. People won't want to do business with someone they consider immoral. Church will start making noise about proper Christian behavior. Some of the ranchers' wives will pressure their husbands to distance themselves from you. She paused. And Jacob, he's not done yet. Peter heard he's talking to a lawyer of his own, planning to fight the divorce, maybe even try to get custody of Emma. Luke felt ice settle in his stomach. He can't do that. He's got no grounds. Doesn't matter if he's got grounds. All that matters is whether he can convince a judge that Hannah's an unfit mother. And right now, with her living under an unmarried man's roof, with rumors flying about the nature of your relationship, he might have a case. There is no relationship. Not like that. Catherine gave him a long look. Isn't there? Because from where I stand, the way you look at her, the way she looks at you, it's not nothing, Mr. Marston. Maybe nothing's happened, maybe you've both been perfectly proper, but the feeling's there. Anyone with eyes can see it. Luke wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in his throat. Because Catherine was right. What he felt for Hannah had grown beyond simple concern into something deeper, more complicated. He couldn't pinpoint when it had happened, maybe during one of their late-night conversations, or watching her with Emma, or seeing her find her strength despite everything she'd been through. But somewhere along the way, Hannah Miller had become essential to him in a way that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. It doesn't matter what I feel, Luke finally said. She's married. She's got enough problems without me adding to them. She won't be married forever. Divorce takes time, but it happens. And when it does, Catherine trailed off meaningfully. Just think about what you want, Mr. Marston, and be honest with yourself about what you're willing to fight for. The ride back to the ranch gave Luke too much time to think. Catherine's words echoed in his head, mixing with the gossip from the saloon, with Tom's warnings, with Sarah's observations. Everyone could see what he'd been trying to deny, that his feelings for Hannah had crossed some invisible line from appropriate concern into dangerous territory. And the worst part was, he wasn't sure he wanted to go back. Hannah was in the kitchen when he arrived, having progressed in recent days to using crutches for short distances. She was attempting to help Sarah with dinner preparation, though from the looks of things, she was causing more chaos than assistance. Flour dusted her hair and dress, and she was laughing at something Sarah had said. A real laugh, full and genuine. The sound stopped Luke in his tracks. This was what Hannah could be without the weight of Jacob dragging her down. Joyful, engaged, alive. And he wanted to be part of that, wanted to be the one who made her laugh, who gave her reasons to smile, who built a life with her that included moments like this. But wanting and having were different things. And right now, wanting had to be enough. That night, after Emma was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Luke found himself on the porch again, his refuge when thoughts became too tangled. Hannah joined him unexpectedly, navigating the steps carefully on her crutches. "Mind company?" she asked. "Never." She settled into the chair beside him with a sigh of relief, propping the crutches against the railing. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, horses shifting in the barn, an owl calling in the distance, the wind in the cottonwoods. "Peter told me Jacob's going to fight the divorce," Hannah said finally. "Said he might try to claim I'm an unfit mother, try to get custody of Emma. He won't succeed. You don't know that. Jacob can be charming when he wants to be, and I'm the one living with an unmarried man, depending on charity, no money of my own. A judge might see that as unstable. A judge would see that you're recovering from injuries sustained because your husband was negligent, that you're making smart decisions to protect yourself and your daughter." Luke turned to look at her. "But I've been thinking, maybe it would be better if you moved to town, stayed with Peter and Catherine, or found a room somewhere, distance yourself from the gossip." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than Luke intended. "But what I want doesn't matter. What matters is what's best for you and Emma. And you think what's best is for me to leave here? Leave the people who've shown me more kindness than anyone else in my life?" Leave the place where I finally feel safe. Hannah's voice was tight with emotion. Or is this really about protecting yourself from the gossip? It's about protecting you from Jacob's accusations. If you're living in town, working somewhere respectable, he can't paint you as what? As a woman who's having an affair with her rescuer. People already believe that, Luke. Moving to town won't change their minds. It'll just confirm that there was something to hide. Hannah gripped the arms of her chair. I'm done hiding, done letting other people's judgment dictate my choices. I'm staying here as long as you'll have me, and if people want to talk, let them talk. You say that now, sir. I say that because I mean it. Hannah turned to face him fully. You've been nothing but honorable. You've given me a safe place to heal, helped me find the courage to leave a bad situation, stood by me when you had every reason to walk away. I won't repay that by running scared at the first sign of trouble. Hannah, let me finish. Her eyes were fierce in the moonlight. I know this is complicated. I know my being here causes you problems, but I also know that for the first time since I married Jacob, I feel like myself again. Like I'm a person who matters, not just someone's wife or someone's burden. And that's because of you, because of how you see me, how you talk to me, how you treat me like I have value beyond my ability to serve someone else's needs. Luke's throat felt tight. You've always had value. Jacob was just too stupid to see it. Maybe. But you helped me see it in myself again, and I won't apologize for wanting to stay in a place where I'm reminded of my own worth. Hannah reached out, her hand covering his on the chair arm. So unless you're telling me you want me gone, I'm staying. We'll face whatever comes together. The touch of her hand sent warmth through Luke's entire body. He knew he should pull away, maintain appropriate distance, remember all the reasons why this was complicated and dangerous. Instead, he found himself turning his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. I don't want you gone, he said quietly. That's the problem. I should want you to leave, should want to protect my reputation and the ranch's standing, but I don't. I want you here. Want to see you getting stronger every day. Want to watch Emma grow. Want to hear you laugh and see you smile and listen to your voice when you talk about the future like it's something worth hoping for. Hannah's breath caught. Luke, I know it's not appropriate. I know the timing's terrible and you're still married and there's 100 reasons why I shouldn't feel this way. Luke met her eyes, letting her see the truth he'd been hiding. But I do. I feel it anyway. And I'm trying real hard to do the right thing here, but it's getting harder every day. What if the right thing isn't pushing me away? Hannah's voice was barely above a whisper. What if the right thing is admitting that we both feel something? That there's a connection here worth acknowledging even if we can't act on it yet? Yet? I won't be married forever. The divorce will happen. And when it does, she squeezed his hand. When it does, I want to know that you'll still be here. That whatever this is between us, it's real enough to wait for. Luke felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump without knowing what lay below. This was a promise, or as close to one as they could make given the circumstances. An acknowledgement that what existed between them wasn't just proximity or gratitude or the intensity of their situation, but something genuine and worth pursuing. I'll be here, he said, however long it takes. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, neither speaking, just existing in the shared understanding of what had been acknowledged. Luke knew they'd crossed a line, knew that Tom and Sarah would have opinions about this development, knew that it would complicate an already complicated situation. But for the first time since pulling Hannah from that collapsed cabin, Luke felt like he was on solid ground, like he knew what he was fighting for and why it mattered. Hannah wasn't just someone he'd rescued, she was someone he'd chosen, someone worth standing beside through whatever storm was coming. The storm arrived sooner than expected. 3 days later, a man rode up to the ranch dressed in the cheap suit of a frontier lawyer. He introduced himself as Howard Blackwell, representing Jacob Miller in the matter of his contested divorce. I'm here to observe Mrs. Miller's living conditions, Blackwell announced, looking around the ranch with obvious disapproval, and to interview relevant parties regarding her fitness as a mother and the nature of her relationship with Mr. Marston. Luke felt his jaw clench, but Sarah stepped forward smoothly. Mrs. Miller is resting. She's recovering from serious injuries sustained when the cabin her husband failed to maintain properly collapsed on her. Any interviews will need to wait until Doc Brennan says she's strong enough. I'm not here to cause distress, Blackwell said, though his expression suggested otherwise. But my client has rights. He has a right to know where his wife is living, who she's living with, whether his daughter is being properly cared for. His daughter is fine, Luke said flatly. Better cared for here than she ever was with Jacob. That's for a judge to decide, not you. Blackwell pulled out a notebook. I'm told Mrs. Miller has been residing here for nearly 6 weeks, in a house with 4 adult men and only 1 married woman for propriety. Is that correct? There are 3 men, me, Tom, and 1 ranch hand who lives in the bunkhouse, and Sarah's here every day. Luke fought to keep his voice level. Hannah has her own room. She's been healing from broken legs and broken ribs. She's hardly been in any condition for impropriety, even if anyone here was interested, which we're not. I see. Blackwell made notes. And you, Mr. Marston, you're unmarried, correct? No wife, no family of your own, yet you took in a married woman and her infant daughter. Some might find that suspicious. Some might find it basic human decency. Or opportunism. My client suggests you saw a vulnerable woman and took advantage. Presented yourself as a rescuer while actually seducing a married woman away from her lawful husband. Luke took a step forward before Tom's hand on his shoulder stopped him. That's a lie, and you know it. What I know is that Mrs. Miller filed for divorce within weeks of coming here, that she's rejected all of my client's attempts at reconciliation, that she's living under your roof, dependent on your charity, possibly feeling obligated to show you gratitude in ways that exceed propriety. Blackwell's smile was unpleasant. A judge might see that as evidence of adultery, Mr. Marston. And in Montana territory, adultery is grounds to deny a divorce petition. In fact, it might give my client grounds to sue you for alienation of affection. I haven't touched her, Luke ground out. Haven't done anything inappropriate. She's here because she had nowhere else safe to go, and I had the means to help. Your word against your reputation, and right now your reputation is that of a man who broke up a marriage. Blackwell tucked away his notebook. I'll be back to interview Mrs. Miller when she's available. In the meantime, I'd suggest you think carefully about whether continuing this living arrangement is worth the legal consequences. After Blackwell left, Luke found himself back in the barn, working off his anger on bales of hay that didn't need moving. Tom joined him eventually, as Luke had known he would. That was ugly, Tom observed. It's going to get uglier. Probably. Question is whether you're ready for it. Tom settled onto his usual hay bale. Because that lawyer laid it out pretty clear. Jacob's going to fight dirty. He's going to make this about you and Hannah, about whether something inappropriate happened. And even if nothing did, even if you've both been perfectly proper, the accusation alone will cause damage. So what do you suggest? That I kick Hannah out? Prove Jacob right that she's got nowhere safe to go? I'm suggesting you think about the long game, about what actually helps Hannah versus what just satisfies your need to protect her. Tom's voice was gentle but firm. If Jacob can prove alienation of affection, if he can convince a judge that you seduced his wife, Hannah loses everything. The divorce gets denied, she goes back to him, and Emma grows up with a drunk for a father. Is that what you want? Of course not. Then maybe it's time to make some hard choices. Maybe Hannah does need to move to town, at least temporarily, remove the appearance of impropriety, give Jacob less ammunition. Tom stood, stretching his back. I know it's not what you want to hear, but sometimes loving someone means doing what's best for them, even when it hurts you. Luke knew Tom was right, knew that his desire to keep Hannah close was tangling up with what was actually best for her and Emma. But the thought of her leaving, of not seeing her every day, of not being there if she needed him, it felt like tearing out part of himself. That evening, he found Hannah in her room, Emma playing on a blanket on the floor, while Hannah sat in her chair by the window. She looked up when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her expression fall. What happened? She asked. Luke told her about Blackwell's visit, about the threats and accusations, about the legal complications that were mounting. Hannah listened in silence, her face growing paler with each word. He's going to use you against me, she said when Luke finished. Jacob's going to make this about us, about whether something happened between us. And it doesn't matter that nothing did. The accusation alone will be enough. That's what Tom thinks. Tom's probably right. Hannah looked down at Emma, who was happily chewing on a cloth doll. So what do we do? Catherine suggested you move to town, stay with her and Peter, or find a room somewhere. Distance yourself from me, from this ranch. Make it clear there's nothing improper happening. And if I don't want to? If I want to stay here where I feel safe? Luke knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Then we both have to be ready for what Jacob's going to throw at us. The accusations, the gossip, the legal battles. We have to be ready to prove that nothing happened, that everything was above board. And Hannah? That means... He struggled to find the words. That means we can't be what we acknowledged on the porch the other night. Can't be heading towards something more. Because if anyone suspects that we're developing feelings, if anyone sees us as anything other than rescuer and rescued, it gives Jacob exactly what he needs. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. So we pretend we feel nothing? Act like there's no connection between us? We wait. Until the divorce is final, until you're legally free, we wait. And we're careful. No more late-night conversations on the porch. No more holding hands. We keep things proper and distant, give Jacob nothing to use against you. That's asking a lot. I know, but it's temporary. Once the divorce is final, once you're free, then we can figure out what this is between us. Luke squeezed her hands gently. But right now, getting you free from Jacob is more important than anything else. Even this. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then she nodded slowly. You're right. I hate it, but you're right. Emma's future is more important than what I want in this moment. Then you'll stay? Even if we have to keep distance between us? I'll stay. Because despite everything, I do feel safer here than anywhere else. She pulled her hands free, wiping at her eyes. I just wish we'd met under different circumstances. Wish I'd found you before Jacob. Wish we had time to explore this without lawyers and divorces and accusations hanging over us. We'll have that time, Luke promised. Just not yet. So began the strangest period of Luke's life, living under the same roof as Hannah, seeing her every day, but maintaining a careful distance that felt unnatural and wrong. They were polite and formal with each other, their conversations limited to practical matters about Emma's care and Hannah's recovery. The easy rapport they developed was replaced by awkward silences and careful avoidance of anything personal. Sarah noticed, of course. You two are miserable, she observed one afternoon while Luke was helping her hang laundry. Whatever you decided, it's making you both unhappy. It's temporary, Luke said tersely, just until the divorce is final. And if the divorce takes months, years, you're going to spend all that time pretending you don't care about each other? If that's what it takes to protect Hannah from Jacob's accusations, yes. Sarah made a disgusted sound. Men, always thinking they need to fix everything by making everyone miserable. You know what I think? I think honesty's better than this careful dance you're doing. I think admitting you care about each other, that you're waiting until she's free to pursue anything, that shows more integrity than sneaking around or pretending there's nothing there. Jacob's lawyer would disagree. Jacob's lawyer isn't the one who has to live with the consequences of lying to yourself. You are. Sarah pinned up a sheet with more force than necessary. Just think about what you're sacrificing, Luke, and whether it's actually helping or just making you both suffer for no good reason. But Luke maintained the distance, followed the rules he'd set for himself and Hannah. Even when he saw her crying quietly in her room one night, even when Emma reached for him and Hannah had to be the one to comfort her, even when every instinct screamed at him to cross that space and hold them both. Because as much as it hurt, as wrong as it felt, Luke knew that Hannah's freedom was worth any temporary pain. And he'd promised to be there when the dust settled, when the divorce was final, when they could finally explore what existed between them without lawyers and judges and angry husbands complicating everything. He just had to be strong enough to wait. They both did. And somehow, they would be. The weeks that followed tested Luke in ways he'd never imagined. Maintaining distance from Hannah while living under the same roof felt like trying to hold his breath underwater. Technically possible, but unnatural and unsustainable. He watched her grow stronger each day, saw her begin to walk without crutches, witnessed Emma's first attempts at crawling, and had to content himself with polite smiles and carefully neutral comments instead of the shared joy that wanted to burst from his chest. Hannah seemed to be struggling just as much. Luke caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, her expression a mix of longing and frustration that mirrored his own feelings. But they both held to the agreement, maintained the proper distance, gave Jacob's lawyer nothing to use against them. The divorce proceedings crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Peter Walsh reported that Jacob was contesting every aspect of the petition, demanding delays, filing counter motions, doing everything possible to drag out the process. His lawyer, Blackwell, had deposed Doc Brennan about Hannah's injuries, interviewed several Silver Creek residents about the Millers' marriage, and made it clear he intended to paint Hannah as an unfaithful wife who'd abandoned her husband for greener pastures. It was during the 8th week of Hannah's residence at the Broken Star that the situation took an unexpected turn. Luke was in the North pasture, working with a young mare who showed promise as a cutting horse, when Tom rode out to find him. "You need to come back to the house," Tom called out, his face grim. "We've got a situation." Luke's heart lurched. "Is it Hannah? Emma? They're fine, physically, but Jacob showed up about an hour ago, sober for once. Says he wants to talk to Hannah, just talk. Sarah's with them in the parlor, making sure everything stays civil. But Hannah asked for you." Luke didn't need to hear more. He left the mare in Tom's capable hands and rode hard back to the ranch. In the parlor, he found Hannah sitting ramrod straight on the sofa, Emma on her lap, while Jacob occupied the chair across from them. Sarah stood near the door, her expression making it clear she was ready to intervene if necessary. Jacob looked different than the last time Luke had seen him, still haggard, still worn, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something that might have been clarity or shame, or both. "Luke." Jacob stood when Luke entered, his hands fidgeting nervously. "I was just telling Hannah, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to talk, really talk, not fight or make accusations or any of that." Luke positioned himself near Hannah, close enough to intervene but far enough to respect the distance they'd been maintaining. "About what?" "About everything. About what a fool I've been. About how badly I've failed as a husband and father." Jacob's voice cracked. "About how you were right to hit me that night, and how I deserved a hell of a lot worse." Hannah shifted Emma on her lap, her expression wary. "What brought this on, Jacob? The last I heard, you were telling anyone who'd listen that I was an adulteress, that Luke seduced me, that you were going to fight the divorce with everything you had." "I was. I did. I've been—" Jacob slumped back into his chair, looking older than his years. "I've been drinking myself to death and lying to everyone, including myself. Telling myself that you were the problem, that if you'd just been more patient, more understanding, everything would have been fine. But then 3 days ago, I woke up in an alley behind the Lucky Strike. Couldn't remember how I got there, couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten a real meal or slept in a bed. And I looked at myself, really looked, and I saw what everyone else has been seeing, a pathetic drunk who destroyed his own life and blamed everyone else for it." "So you got sober," Hannah said, her tone carefully neutral. "That's good, Jacob. It's what you should have done months ago. Years ago. Should have done it years ago." Jacob leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Hannah, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I put you through, the danger I put you and Emma in, that cabin." His voice broke. "You could have died because I was too proud to admit I couldn't afford a better place, too busy gambling away what little money we had on sure things that never came through. I'm not going to argue with you about the past, Jacob. What's done is done." I know, and I'm not here asking you to take me back. I'm here to tell you that I'm not going to fight the divorce anymore. I'm going to sign whatever papers need signing. I'm going to let you go because it's the right thing to do, the only decent thing I've done in a long time." The silence that followed was heavy with surprise. Even Sarah looked taken aback. Luke watched Hannah's face carefully, saw the play of emotions there. Shock, relief, suspicion, sadness. "Why now?" Hannah finally asked. "Why the change of heart?" Jacob reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter, its edges worn as if it had been read many times. "This came 2 days ago. From my father back in Ohio. He's dying, Hannah. Consumption. Doesn't have long. And in this letter, he told me he was disappointed in the man I'd become. Said he'd heard about how I was living, about the wife and daughter I was neglecting. Said he hoped I'd find the courage to be better before it was too late. He held out the letter toward Hannah, who took it hesitantly. Luke watched as she read, saw her expression soften despite everything. "I'm sorry, Jacob," Hannah said quietly. "I know you and your father had a complicated relationship, but I also know you loved him. He was the one who taught me about honor, about being a man who keeps his promises, and I became the opposite of everything he tried to teach me." Jacob wiped at his eyes roughly. "I can't fix what I've done to you. Can't undo the pain or the fear or nearly getting you killed. But I can stop making things worse. I can sign the papers, testify that you've been a good mother, that the collapse was my fault for keeping you in that unsafe cabin. I can tell the truth for once in my miserable life." Hannah looked at Luke then, a question in her eyes. He gave the smallest nod, leaving the decision to her but supporting whatever she chose. She turned back to Jacob, her voice steady despite the emotion Luke could see she was holding back. "If you mean this, if you're really going to stop fighting and let me go, then I appreciate it. Not for myself, but for Emma. She deserves better than growing up watching her parents destroy each other in court." Hannah paused, choosing her words carefully. "But Jacob, getting sober and signing papers, that's just the beginning. If you want any kind of relationship with your daughter as she grows up, you need to prove you can stay sober. Prove you can be reliable. That's going to take time and consistency. I know, and I will. I'm going back to Ohio, going to be with my father for whatever time he has left. After he's gone, I don't know. Maybe I'll stay there, try to start over somewhere I haven't already burned every bridge." Jacob stood, moving toward the door. "I just wanted you to know. What happened between you and Luke, whatever feelings might be there, I know that's my fault too. I know I pushed you away long before he pulled you out of that rubble, and I'm not going to use it against you anymore." After Jacob left, the house felt strangely quiet. Sarah excused herself to give Luke and Hannah privacy, taking Emma with her to the kitchen for a snack. Luke and Hannah sat in the parlor, neither quite knowing what to say. "Do you believe him?" Hannah finally asked. "Do you think he means it?" "I don't know. People can change, but usually only when they hit rock bottom and decide to climb back up. Sounds like Jacob might have hit his bottom." Luke moved to sit in the chair Jacob had vacated, maintaining the careful distance even though everything in him wanted to close the space between them. "Question is whether you believe him." "I want to. For Emma's sake, I want to believe her father can be someone worth knowing, but I've believed Jacob's promises before, and they always turned out to be empty." Hannah's hands twisted in her lap. "What if this is just another manipulation? Another way to get me to let my guard down? Then we stay alert. But Hannah, even if it is a manipulation, he said he'd sign the papers. That's what you need most right now, for him to stop fighting so the divorce can go through. And if he changes his mind, if he sobers up for a week and then decides being angry is easier than being honest." Luke leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Then we deal with it. But you can't live your life waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sometimes you have to take people at their word and prepare for the consequences either way." 2 days later, Peter Walsh arrived with news that transformed everything. Jacob had come to his office, sober and clear-eyed, and signed all the necessary documents. More than that, he'd provided a written statement admitting to neglect, to creating unsafe living conditions, to failing in his duties as a husband and father. He'd agreed to surrender all parental rights to Emma if that's what Hannah wanted, though he asked for the possibility of supervised visits once he could prove sustained sobriety. "The judge reviewed everything this morning," Peter reported, his face split by a genuine smile. "He's granting the divorce, Hannah. You're free. The official decree will be issued within the week, but legally, as of today, you're no longer married to Jacob Miller." Hannah's face went through a series of transformations: shock, disbelief, relief, and finally a joy so pure it made Luke's chest ache. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. "I'm free?" she finally whispered. "Really free?" "Really free," Peter confirmed. "It's over, Hannah. You won." After Peter left, Hannah retreated to her room, needing time to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Luke gave her space, threw himself into work, tried to ignore the way his heart was racing with a mixture of hope and fear. The barrier that had kept them apart was gone, dissolved by Jacob's unexpected cooperation. But that didn't mean Hannah would want what Luke wanted. Didn't mean that freedom from one relationship meant readiness for another. That evening, after Emma was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Luke found himself drawn to the porch again. The Montana sky was ablaze with stars, the air cool and crisp with the promise of autumn approaching. He'd been sitting there maybe 10 minutes when the door opened and Hannah emerged. She'd put on one of the dresses Catherine had brought her, a simple blue calico that brought out her eyes. Her hair was loose around her shoulders instead of pinned up as she usually wore it, and she was walking without any support, her legs fully healed at last. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the chair beside him. "Always." They sat in silence for a moment, the comfortable kind they'd shared before Jacob's lawyer had forced them apart. Luke was acutely aware of her presence, of the way her hands rested in her lap, of the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I've been thinking," Hannah said finally, "about what happens now, about what I want my life to look like going forward." Luke's heart hammered against his ribs. "And what did you decide?" "I decided that I've spent too much time living according to other people's expectations. First my parents, then Jacob, then everyone in Silver Creek with their opinions about what a proper woman should do." She turned to look at him, her eyes bright in the starlight. "I'm done with that. Done letting fear or propriety or worry about gossip dictate my choices." "That's good. You should live your own life." "I want to stay here, at the Broken Star. Sarah's offered me permanent work helping around the ranch, cooking, bookkeeping, helping with the horses once I'm confident enough. It would give me a way to support myself and Emma, give us stability while I figure out what comes next." Hannah paused. "But I need to know if that's all right with you, if having me here long-term is something you're comfortable with." Luke felt like he was standing on the edge of that cliff again, the one he'd imagined weeks ago. Except this time, he could see what lay below. A future that included Hannah and Emma, days filled with shared meals and conversations, nights on this porch watching stars together. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I want you to stay," he said carefully. "But Hannah, I need you to understand something. These past weeks, keeping distance between us, pretending I didn't feel what I felt, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And now that there's no legal reason for that distance, I don't know if I can maintain it." "Who's asking you to?" Hannah's voice was soft but certain. "Luke, do you remember what I said that night on the porch, before we decided to keep distance between us? I asked if you'd still be here when the divorce was final, if whatever this is between us was real enough to wait for." "I remember." "Well, the divorce is final. I'm free. And you're still here." She reached out, her hand covering his on the chair arm, just like she had that night. "So I guess the question now is, what do we do with this connection we've been ignoring?" Luke turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers, feeling the rightness of the gesture after weeks of careful avoidance. "I guess we see where it goes. Slowly, carefully, giving you time to figure out who you are now that you're not Jacob's wife. No pressure, no expectations, just..." He struggled to find the words. "Just letting this be what it is." "And what is it? What do you think this is between us?" Luke met her eyes, letting her see everything he'd been holding back. "I think it's the beginning of something that could be real, something lasting. But I also think you've been through hell and back, and you need time to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. You need time to be yourself, to figure out what you want without someone else's needs or expectations clouding your judgment." "What if I already know what I want?" "Then we'll get there. But let's get there right this time. Let's build something solid, something that can weather storms because we took the time to lay a proper foundation." Luke squeezed her hand gently. "You're worth the wait, Hannah. You and Emma both. So we take our time, we do this right, and we don't rush just because we can." Hannah was quiet for a moment, then she laughed, a real laugh, full of relief and happiness. "You know what? That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Not flowers or poetry or grand gestures, just patience, respect, a promise to do things right. I'm not much for flowers or poetry anyway." "Good, because neither am I." She shifted closer, still holding his hand, her shoulder brushing his. But I do like this. Sitting here with you, not having to measure every word or worry about who's watching, just being. They sat like that until the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew cold enough to drive them inside. When they parted at Hannah's door, Luke almost pulled her close, almost kissed her the way he'd been wanting to for weeks. But he held back, content with the gentle squeeze of her hand and the promise in her eyes. There would be time for more. They had time now. The days that followed felt like emerging from a long winter into spring. Hannah took on more responsibilities around the ranch, proving herself capable in ways that surprised even Sarah. She had a natural way with the horses, approaching them with gentle confidence that the animals responded to. Her bookkeeping was meticulous, organizing 3 years of Tom's chaotic records into a system that actually made sense. And her cooking, once she got the hang of the wood stove's particular quirks, was significantly better than anything the ranch hands had been eating. But it was the small moments that Luke treasured most. The way Hannah would seek him out during the day to ask his opinion on something, not because she needed his approval, but because she valued his input. The conversations over coffee in the early morning before the ranch fully woke. The way Emma had started calling him Uke and reaching for him with complete trust. The sound of Hannah's laughter floating across the yard while she hung laundry or worked in the garden Sarah had helped her start. They were courting, Luke supposed, though it looked different from any courting he'd seen before. There were no formal calls or chaperoned outings. Instead, there were shared chores and stolen moments, conversations that lasted hours, and comfortable silences that required no words. Luke was learning Hannah, really learning her, discovering the woman beneath the circumstances that had brought them together. He learned that she had a sharp wit that came out when she felt safe enough to show it. That she sang to Emma in a clear, sweet voice when she thought no one was listening. That she loved books but had rarely had time to read them and now devoured anything Peter brought her. That she was fiercely protective of those she loved, but learning, slowly, to accept help without seeing it as weakness. That she had dreams of teaching someday, of giving other children the education she'd valued in her own youth. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Catherine Walsh came out to the ranch with an unexpected proposition. The schoolteacher in Silver Creek had married and moved away, leaving the position vacant. The school board was looking for someone educated, responsible, and willing to work for the modest salary they could offer. "I put your name forward," Catherine told Hannah over tea in the kitchen, "told them about your education, your character, your situation. They've agreed to interview you if you're interested." Hannah's face lit up with a hope Luke had rarely seen. "Really? They'd consider me despite everything? Despite being divorced?" "Hannah, this is Montana territory, not Philadelphia high society. Half the school board members have checkered pasts of their own. What they care about is whether you can teach their children to read and cipher." Catherine smiled. "Besides, I might have mentioned that you've been living at one of the most respectable ranches in the area, working hard and conducting yourself with complete propriety. That carried some weight." The interview was scheduled for the following week. Luke watched Hannah prepare with an intensity that reminded him of how she'd approached the divorce proceedings. Thorough, determined, allowing no detail to chance. Sarah helped her select an appropriate dress, something that struck the balance between professional and approachable. Peter provided sample teaching materials to review. Tom offered to watch Emma during the interview, gruffly declaring that he'd managed to keep his own 3 children alive to adulthood, so one baby wouldn't be beyond his capabilities. The night before the interview, Luke found Hannah on the porch again, their place now, by unspoken agreement. She was reviewing notes by lamplight, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're going to do fine," Luke said, settling into the chair beside her. "What if they ask about Jacob, about the divorce?" "Then you tell them the truth. That you made a mistake marrying him, that you rectified that mistake when you had the means to do so, and that you're focused now on building a better life for yourself and your daughter. Anyone who's got a problem with that isn't worth worrying about." Hannah set aside her notes, turning to face him fully. "Luke, can I ask you something? And will you promise to answer honestly?" "Always. If I get this job, if I start teaching, it's going to change things. I'll have my own income, my own purpose beyond just helping around the ranch. I'll be more independent." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Does that scare you? The idea of me being independent instead of dependent on your hospitality?" Luke felt a smile tug at his lips. Why would that scare me? Because some men, they like being needed, like being the provider, the rescuer. And if I don't need rescuing anymore, if I can stand on my own, then you become someone I'm choosing to be with, not someone I'm obligated to help. Hannah, I don't want you dependent on me. I want you choosing me because you want to, not because you have no other options. Luke reached for her hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. You being strong and independent, that doesn't make me want you less. It makes me want you more. Makes this real instead of just gratitude or convenience. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. How did I get so lucky? Finding you, of all people, in the wreckage of my worst mistake. I'm the lucky one. Getting to watch you become who you're meant to be. That's a privilege, not a burden. She got the job. The school board offered it to her 3 days after the interview, impressed by her education and moved by her obvious passion for teaching. The salary was modest but enough, combined with her continued part-time work at the ranch, to provide for herself and Emma. Catherine helped her find a small cottage near the schoolhouse, just 2 rooms but clean and safe and hers. The day Hannah moved into her cottage was bittersweet. Luke helped transport her meager belongings, clothes, books, Emma's crib, a few pieces of furniture Sarah insisted she take. It was strange loading up the wagon with signs of her departure after months of having her under the same roof. You know you don't have to leave, Sarah said as they prepared to go. You're welcome to stay here, keep your room, just travel to town for teaching. I know, and I appreciate that more than I can say. Hannah looked around the room that had been hers for so long, her expression soft with memory. But I need to do this. Need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own, provide my own home for Emma. Besides, she glanced at Luke with a hint of mischief in her eyes. If we're going to court properly, I should probably have my own place. Wouldn't be right otherwise. The cottage was small but full of light, with windows that looked out on the mountains in the distance. Luke and Tom helped Hannah arrange her furniture while Catherine and Sarah unpacked boxes and made up the bed. Emma crawled around, delighted by the new space, getting into everything with the determined curiosity of a 1-year-old. When everything was arranged and the others had left, Luke found himself alone with Hannah in her new home. She was standing by the window, looking out at the view, one hand resting on the sill. It's mine, she said softly. This whole place, it's mine. Not my husband's, not my parents', not a borrowed room in someone else's house. Mine. Luke came to stand beside her, close enough to feel her warmth but not touching. How does it feel? Terrifying, exhilarating, right. She turned to face him, her expression serious. Luke, I need to tell you something. These months at the ranch, everything you've done for me and Emma, I don't think I ever properly thanked you. Not just for pulling us out of that cabin, though that was, her voice caught. That was everything, but for giving me time to heal, space to figure out who I was, the support to become strong enough to stand on my own. You gave me back my life. I won't forget that. You don't need to thank me for... Let me finish. Hannah placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. I also need you to know that what I feel for you, it's not gratitude, not obligation or convenience or any of those things we were worried about. It's real, Luke. Whatever we're building here, it's based on who we actually are, not the circumstances that brought us together. Luke covered her hand with his, feeling his heart hammer beneath their joined touch. I know. I feel it too. Then I think... Hannah took a breath, seeming to gather courage. I think maybe we should stop being quite so careful. Stop holding back quite so much. We've built our foundation. We've taken our time. Maybe now we can start actually building something on top of that foundation. Luke understood what she was offering, what she was asking for. Months of careful courtship, of maintaining propriety, of waiting until she was ready. And now she was ready. They were ready. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones gently. You're sure? I'm sure. Luke kissed her then, finally, after months of wanting and waiting. It was gentle at first, tentative, learning the shape of her lips against his. But when Hannah sighed and leaned into him, her arms coming around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of all the longing they'd been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. Been wanting to do that for a while now. Hannah laughed softly. I noticed. I've been wanting it too, but I'm glad we waited. Glad we did this right. So what happens now? Now? Hannah stepped back slightly, her hands still resting on his shoulders. Now we see where this goes. I teach. You train horses. We court properly. Sunday dinners, walks after church, all the normal things couples do when they're figuring out if they fit. Pretty sure we already know we fit. Maybe. But it's nice to do things the right way for once. To not rush or hide or worry about who's watching. She smiled, that brilliant smile that had been appearing more and more frequently. Besides, Emma needs to see what a healthy relationship looks like. Needs to understand that love is about respect and partnership, not dependence and desperation. Luke understood what she meant. They were building something not just for themselves, but for the little girl who'd survived a cabin collapse and would grow up knowing her mother had the strength to leave a bad situation and the wisdom to choose better the second time. Over the following months, they fell into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortable. Luke would ride into Silver Creek most Sunday afternoons, timing his arrival for when Hannah finished teaching Sunday school. They'd walk together through the town, Emma toddling between them or riding on Luke's shoulders, and people would greet them with gradually warming acceptance. The initial scandal had faded, replaced by recognition that this was simply a man and a woman building something good together. They had dinner at Peter and Catherine's house, where the four of them would talk late into the night about books and politics and the future of Montana Territory. They went on picnics when the weather allowed, finding quiet spots near streams where Emma could play and they could talk without interruption. Luke taught Hannah to ride properly, patiently working with her until she was confident enough to go out on her own. Hannah taught Luke to dance, laughing at his initial awkwardness until he found the rhythm and surprised them both by being rather good at it. They were building a history together, accumulating shared experiences and inside jokes and the kind of comfortable familiarity that comes from really knowing another person. Luke learned that Hannah was grumpy before her morning coffee and silly when overtired, that she worried excessively about being a good enough mother despite being clearly excellent at it, that she had strong opinions about literature and would argue passionately about character motivations, that she was ticklish on her ribs and loved thunderstorms and cried at weddings even of people she barely knew. Hannah learned that Luke was most himself around the horses, that he had surprising depths of patience except when dealing with incompetence, that he'd wanted a family his whole life but had convinced himself he was better off alone until she'd proven him wrong, that he was more romantic than he admitted, leaving wildflowers on her doorstep or helping her fix things around the cottage without being asked, that he loved her daughter as fiercely as if Emma were his own, and that his devotion to them both was absolute and unshakable. It was late spring, nearly a year after the cabin collapse, when Luke finally spoke the words they'd both been circling around for months. They were at the ranch, having ridden out for a picnic near the stream where Luke had first found them. Emma was napping in a basket nearby while Luke and Hannah sat on the blanket, watching the water flow past. "Marry me," Luke said suddenly, the words coming out more blunt than he'd intended. Hannah turned to him, eyes wide. "What?" "Sorry, I meant to do this better." Luke took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been thinking about this for a while now, about what we're building, where we're heading. And Hannah, I don't want to court you forever. Don't want to keep saying goodbye at your cottage door and riding back to the ranch alone. I want to wake up next to you every morning, want to help you with Emma, want to give her siblings if you're willing, want to build a life with you that's ours, not borrowed or temporary or careful. I want to marry you, Hannah Miller, if you'll have me." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling so wide it transformed her whole face. "Yes." "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you. Of course I'll marry you." She launched herself at him, nearly knocking him backward on the blanket. "I love you, Luke Marston. I've loved you for months, but I was waiting for you to say it first, because I didn't want to pressure you or make you feel obligated, or—" Luke kissed her, cutting off the nervous ramble. "I love you too. Have for longer than I wanted to admit. You and Emma, you're my family, have been since the day I pulled you out of that rubble." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek. It was a simple ceremony. Hannah wore a blue dress that Catherine had helped her make, and Luke borrowed Tom's good suit. Peter gave Hannah away while Sarah stood as her witness. Emma, now walking confidently on her own, served as an enthusiastic if unpredictable flower girl, more interested in eating the petals than scattering them. Half the town came, the scandal of Hannah's divorce long forgotten in favor of celebrating a love story that had overcome considerable odds. Even some of the church ladies who'd originally turned up their noses admitted it was a beautiful ceremony. And wasn't it wonderful that poor dear Hannah had found someone who truly cherished her? Jacob sent a letter and a small gift, a silver cup for Emma, engraved with her initials. He was still in Ohio, the letter said, still sober, working in his late father's business, and trying to become someone his daughter could be proud of someday. He hoped Hannah was happy, hoped she'd forgive him eventually, and promised to respect whatever boundaries she set regarding Emma. It was the letter of a man who'd finally grown up, though far too late to save his first family. Hannah read the letter at the reception and felt nothing. Not anger or regret or satisfaction, just a distant acknowledgement that Jacob was part of her past, but had no claim on her future. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it away for Emma, who might want it someday when she was old enough to understand. The reception was held at the Broken Star, with tables set up under the cottonwoods and music provided by a fiddle player Tom knew. They danced and ate and celebrated into the evening, surrounded by people who'd become family through circumstance and choice. Sarah cried happy tears and declared that she'd known from the beginning how things would end. Tom pretended to be gruff, but Luke caught him smiling more than once. As the sun set and the party wound down, Luke and Hannah slipped away to the house. Their house now, as Tom and Sarah had decided to officially transfer ownership of the main house to the newlyweds while they moved to a smaller place they'd been building on the property. It was a wedding gift, they said, and refused to hear any arguments about it being too much. In their bedroom, truly theirs now, no longer a borrowed room or temporary accommodation, Luke held his wife and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From desperate rescue to careful friendship to love that had grown despite every obstacle placed in its path. "What are you thinking?" Hannah asked, curled against his chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his shirt. "That a year ago I was alone in a bunkhouse, convinced I was better off without complications. And now I'm married to the most remarkable woman I've ever met. Stepfather to a little girl who's got her mother's stubbornness and her own unique charm, and happier than I ever thought I could be." Hannah tilted her face up to kiss him softly. "I was thinking something similar, about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best outcomes, about how I had to lose everything to find what actually mattered. Any regrets?" "Not a single one. Well," she paused, thoughtful. "Maybe one small regret. I wish Emma could have memories of this, of her mother getting a second chance at happiness. But she's too young.